Chapter 537. It's really a coincidence. Qin Yu said after a while, and the expression on his face had returned to indifference. Young master, this beggar's chicken. Shall we take it in? A waiter of the Zuyu Tower stood at the stairway, looked at the scene in front of him, and said in a trembling voice. Take it in, we have paid for it. The proud Lolita had been thinking about the chicken for a long time, and immediately urged. Xiaozui's face was full of fear, and she was about to cry. Young lady, what time is it? Why are you still thinking about the beggar's chicken? They can't even leave. Young Duke Qin, if there is no other urgent matter, we will go in. Li Yi pointed to the inside of the room and said, the dishes will be cold later. Qin Yu took a deep breath, glanced at the strange little girl, and said with a smile, Uncle Li, please help yourself, but these two girls can't leave. Li Yi looked at him in astonishment and asked, why is this so? In broad daylight, with the heaven and earth bright and clear, could it be that young Duke Qin wants to put on a good show of forcefully snatching a girl from a good family? When Li Yi spoke, he deliberately emphasized the word again. The smile on Qin Yu's face froze, and then his chest began to rise and fall slightly. The rest of the people looked at him. Madhav **Ker, it's just a slap in the face. Young Duke Qin was beaten and seriously injured by a passing Jianghu swordsman because he molested a good girl in the street, and he had to rest at home for several months. It could be said that he had lost his face completely. When people mentioned this matter, they would only say that he was injured by a villain, and no one dared to mention molesting a good girl. This Uncle Li was really good at slapping people's faces and cursing people's shortcomings. Last time in the Imperial Palace, he slapped young Duke Qin fiercely twice, and now this sentence was no less than a slap in the face, which was a double blow to his spirit and body. There were rumors among the people that this Uncle Li was worthy of being the nemesis of young Duke Qin. You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. County Uncle Li, be careful with your words. When Qin Yu spoke again, he didn't hide the anger in his eyes. If it were someone else, he would have already sent out his guards to vent the anger that had accumulated in his heart for the past few months. However, at this moment, he was just angry. After all, although he had the title of Madman Qin, the person in front of him was a real madman. He didn't have to take responsibility for beating people, and he was a madman with the certificate of the Imperial Physician Bureau. Hey, young Duke Qin, don't be modest. Li Yi reached out and patted him on the shoulder. Then he turned to Tsing Zumo and said, let's go. We've been out for a long time. The food is cold. Tsing Zumo bit his teeth and said, you guys go in first. They won't do anything to us. She knew what kind of impact the previous incident would have. The government defined it as an assassination. If the swordsman was caught, the consequences would be unimaginable. However, she and Xiao Chui were also victims. Even if they really went to the government, they could explain it clearly. There was a prime minister in Qin's mansion, who also had extraordinary power in the court. She didn't want to get Li Yi involved. Li Yi didn't rush in this time. He looked at her and asked, how do you know him? Xiao Chui said with some grievance, yes, last time when Miss and I just came to the capital, they insisted that Miss and I go with them. A passing swordsman couldn't stand it, so he beat him hard. So those two women are you. It was also the first time that Li Yi had heard of this matter, and his tone was a little surprised. It was really true that people who were not a family would not enter the house. This young Duke Qin and him were opposite of each other. Seeing that young Duke Qin was obviously no match for County Magistrate Li, a young man immediately stood out and said, Li. Supervisor Li, these two women are involved in the case of the assassination of young Duke Qin. We have sent someone to inform the government, and there will be an official coming soon. Is Supervisor Li going to protect them? You are. Li Yi looked at him and asked. The young man said, I am Li Jianren. Oh, from the family of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works. Li Yi still had some impression of this name. After all, there weren't many people who could come up with such a fresh and refined name. It was high-end and classy. Yes. Li Jianren cupped his hands, but he was depressed in his heart. In this kind of occasion, it was not suitable for him to stand out. After all, he still had to study at the mathematics college in the future. If he offended the supervisor before he officially enrolled, would he have a good life in the future? Not bad, I will remember you. Li nodded and said, then there is no hurry. Let's wait for the official to come first. He looked back at Xing Zumo and said, what are you waiting for? Go in and eat. It cost a lot of money. When he was about to go in, he looked back at Qin Yu and asked seriously, is it necessary? It is. Qin Yu said with a smile. Li nodded, turned around, and closed the door. Watching them walk back into the room and close the door, Prince Duanyang was already full of anger. Arrogant, simply too arrogant. Although he was far away in Chuzhou and was not very familiar with the affairs of the capital, he did not expect that a small county uncle would dare to be so presumptuous in front of him and young Duke Qin. Li Jianren and Cui Shixin and the others shook their heads. This was arrogance. Royal Prince Duanyang seemed to have underestimated County Uncle Li too much. Beating up young Duke Qin, beating up His Royal Highness King of Shu, forcing the officials and His Majesty to make concessions, everything he did could not be described as arrogant. Prince Duanyang was angry and kicked the door of the private room, but was stopped by Qin Yu. Wait. Qin Yu only said this one word. He had dealt with Li Yi more than once, so naturally, he would not look down on him. It was not suitable for him and Prince Duanyang to intervene in this matter. If the government directly intervened, it would be official business. Even if Li Yi was favored by the emperor, could he reach into the government of the capital? But the Qin family could. Although Qin Yu of the Qin family was no longer the capital magistrate and some things did become troublesome, at least half of the people present did not care about a small capital magistrate. The Jingdo magistrate Lu Dao also knew that in the eyes of those famous wastrels in Jingdo, he, the Jingdo magistrate, was nothing and would be held back in every way. In his heart, he cursed the little Duke Qin. What's the use of finding those two women? If you have the ability, go and find that hero who beat you up. You failed to flirt with an innocent woman and got beaten up instead. You've lost all your face, and you still dare to come out and make a fool of yourself. Now, you seem to want to do something to those two innocent women. Do you really think that you own the government? However, he could not ignore this matter and even had to go in person. After all, he could not afford to offend any of those people. Hurry up. County Magistrate Lu opened the curtain and urged the sedan bearers. Drunken Moon Tower, room number 2. Outside the door, there were several people watching vigilantly to prevent the people inside from slipping away. Inside the room, the arrogant Lolita ate without caring about her image. Li Yi had no interest in the beggar's chicken, but he had to say that the tea here was not bad. It was just a little expensive, 10 taels of silver for a pot. He really felt sorry for the old emperor. Go get another pot of tea. He turned his head and ordered the waiter standing behind him. The gray-robed old man next to him finally could not help frowning at him and asked, "Is it necessary?" Li Yi looked at him and asked in surprise, "Isn't it just 2 pots of tea? Won't the palace reimburse it?" After a moment, he sighed and said, "You just heard, he said it is necessary." Chapter 538. Xing Zumo looked at Li Yi with a worried expression. She wanted to say something but stopped. "What about me? Let's eat." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Do you still have any melon seeds?" "I still want the cream flavor." Xing Zumo took out a small embroidered bag from her waist and said, "There's no cream flavor left." There's only 5 cents left. Forget it, it's still edible. Li Yi nodded, then looked at the 2 brocade boxes she placed on the table and asked, "What are these?" "A gift for Bing Ning and Xane." Perhaps Li Yi's calmness infected her. Xingzumo relaxed a little and said, "What? What gift?" Hearing the gift, the proud lowly put down the drumstick and wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. "It's not something expensive. Open it and see if you like it." Xingzumo handed over the box and said with a smile, "Wow, there's a gift." The proud Lolita still had the temperament of a young girl. She couldn't wait to take the brocade boxes. The 2 brocade boxes had her and Yongning's names written on them. She handed the other brocade box to Yongning and quickly opened her own brocade box. So beautiful. Seeing the thing lying in the box, the proud lowly couldn't help but exclaim. Li Yi looked at it. It turned out to be a bracelet. This kind of accessory was very common in the future, but it naturally didn't exist in the present. He once told Xingzumo that he could open an accessory shop in the future and sell it with ready-made clothes. Of course, it was impossible to use precious gems in this world. The premise was that he could first burn the glass, which could greatly reduce the cost. However, this idea would probably have to wait for a long time. After all, those sparkling and translucent things were very expensive. Even if ordinary glass was sold at the price of gemstones, there would still be countless people fighting to buy it. The profit was unimaginable, even far exceeding that of perfume and spirits. However, it was not suitable to take it out too early. The thing on these 2 bracelets was naturally not glass, but it could also be regarded as jewelry. However, with Xingzumo's current wealth, she could easily buy it. And this strangely shaped bracelet should have been personally designed by her. Although the proud Lolita lived in the palace and had seen countless jewelry, it was impossible for her to have seen this kind. "Thank you, Sister Zhang." After the proud lowly came back to her senses, she smiled sweetly at Xingzumo. After thinking for a moment, she picked up the other drumstick in her bowl for Xingzumo. "Thank you, big sister." Yongning was not as excited as her sister, but she still looked very happy. Xingzumo looked at the 2 of them, then looked outside the door and said worriedly, Li Yi put a piece of tofu in her bowl and said, "Don't worry, people who disturb other people's meals usually don't have a good ending. Hurry up and eat, it's really going to get cold." Xiao Chui was on the verge of tears. The people outside were all fiendish, and it was obvious that they were not good people. They were about to call the officials, so how could the young miss and Lily still eat? With tears in her eyes, she picked up a piece of tofu. This tofu is really delicious. No wonder it only costs 3 taels of silver. I have to have a good taste, this person is so bold and arrogant. I don't believe you can bear it until now. In another room, Duke Duanyang looked at Qin Yu and said. Qin Yu lowered his head and drank a cup of wine, without saying anything. With his character, he naturally would not let go of those who offended him so easily. However, on the surface, he could not do anything at all. These days, his grandfather was very strict with him. Most of the time, he was grounded at home or recuperated, but in fact, he did a lot of things secretly. However, the first time he sent someone to follow him, he was beaten up and thrown into a deep alley. The second time, his leg was directly broken. After that, he sent out a martial arts master secretly recruited, but the result was the same. Now, the Qin's mansion had a lot of people with broken hands and feet. After that, he gave up the idea of secretly taking revenge. No matter how proud he was, he had to admit that he was helpless against Li Yi. Originally, after beating up the king of Shu, he entrusted this matter to the king of Shu. However, he did not expect that after the king of Shu came out of the palace, he became a good boy, reading at home all day or visiting some officials of the court. Until now, he had not seen the king of Shu. The humiliation he suffered on the street last time made him the laughing stock of the whole capital, which was still unforgettable. This time, when he met these two women again in the Drunken Moon Tower, he naturally would not let them go. However, with the intervention of Li Yi, he had to be careful. The best way was to borrow a knife. Borrowing a knife from the imperial court. As long as he insisted that the two women were related to the thief, the following things would naturally be logical. No matter how arrogant he was, someone would not forgive him for daring to interfere with the imperial court's investigation. At this time, the door was pushed open. A servant of the Qin's mansion came in and said, "Young master, Lord Liu is here." Qin Yu stood up from his seat and walked out of the door. He cupped his hands in obeisance to a person who had just walked up the stairs and said with a smile, "This time, I have caused trouble for Lord Liu." The current capital magistrate, Liu Dao, did not belong to Prime Minister Qin. He used to work under the capital governor, Dong Wenyun, and Dong Wenyun's father-in-law was Prime Minister Shen, who had the same status as his grandfather. Therefore, although he looked down on this capital magistrate, he could not be too arrogant at this moment. "Young Duke Qin, you are too serious." County Magistrate Liu also cupped his hands in obeisance and said with a smile, "This is my duty." "Young Duke Qin, you don't have to be so polite." Qin Yu smiled and pointed to the young man beside him and said, "This is Prince Duanyang." County Magistrate Liu was shocked. He did not expect that this matter would involve Prince Duanyang. This was an existence that he could not afford to offend. He hurriedly cupped his hands in obeisance and said, "Greetings, Prince Duanyang." The young man waved his hand and said, "Sir, you'd better get down to business first. The two people are in the room behind you." Hearing this, County Magistrate Liu immediately became a little vigilant. There was Royal Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin, and all the other hedonistic young masters of the capital. Which one of them didn't have a heaven-defying background? Yet, they had gone out of their way to invite an official over. If someone said that there was no inside story to this matter, he wouldn't believe it even if they beat him to death. However, as the county magistrate, this was indeed his duty. At this time, he could only bite the bullet and do it. "Sir, do you want to break the door?" Seeing County Magistrate Liu pointing to the door, a yamen runner immediately asked. The more than 10 yamen runners who followed him here looked a little excited. They were working for these big shots. If they did it well, County Magistrate Liu would benefit a lot. Naturally, they would also benefit a lot. "Knock on the door." County Magistrate Liu glared at him and said. A group of brainless things. If there was really something good, would these people let them come here? It was obvious that there was trouble. Before the yamen runner had time to knock on the door opened from the inside. Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Liu standing at the door and said in surprise, "Hey, County Magistrate Liu, why are you here? I haven't seen you for a long time." County Magistrate Liu was stunned for a moment, then his face immediately showed a happy expression and said, "Sir Li, how come it's you? I haven't seen you for a long time." County Magistrate Liu was full of gratitude for this former County Magistrate Li. If it were not for him, he was afraid that he would still be in the position of Anshi County Magistrate, waiting to retire. How could he sit in the position of the capital magistrate? His future was even brighter. He was afraid that in a few years or dozens of years, he would be able to sit in one of the highest positions. Seeing that the two people were standing at the door and chatting, Prince Duanyang was stunned. After being stunned for a while, Qin Yu's face gradually became gloomy. The rest of the people looked at County Magistrate Liu and were even more surprised. They had asked him to come here to arrest people. Who would have thought that County Magistrate Liu would actually chat with them? Chapter 539. Ahem, Lord Liu. Royal Prince Duanyang finally couldn't help opening his mouth. His tone was a little high and there was a bit of dissatisfaction in his voice. County Magistrate Liu just remembered why he knocked on the door. He looked at Li Yi, then looked at young Duke Qin, royal Prince Duanyang, and the others. The person they wanted to arrest was actually related to Lord Li. This bunch of fellas truly harbored malicious intentions. This was the noble person in his life. Not only did he not want to offend him, but from other aspects, it was also very unwise to offend an important official who was favored by the emperor. Lord Liu, this is. Li Yi looked at County Magistrate Liu and asked with a faint smile. This. County Magistrate Liu's heart was extremely tangled. It was so good to play with his concubine at home. Why did he have to run out and get involved in this muddy water? Wasn't he looking for trouble for himself? I want to eat this, and this, too. A clear voice came from the room. County Magistrate Liu's eyes inadvertently glanced at it and could no longer move away. That little girl waving chopsticks, why did she look so much like Princess Shining? Last time when he was summoned to the palace, he accidentally met Arresterly. No, it should be Princess Royal Highness. At that time, there was another person beside Princess Royal Highness. County Magistrate Liu vaguely remembered that the palace servants called her Princess Shining. Because of this, he looked at the little girl a few more times and had a deep memory. If the little girl in the room wore a palace dress, wouldn't she be Princess Shining? He looked back at the several bailiffs with weapons on their waists, only felt his lips dry, and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Lord Li. When he looked back at Li Yi again, his voice was a little trembling. Li Yi looked at him and said with a smile, "If Lord Liu is tired, go home and take a nap." "Thank you, Lord Li. I'm indeed a little tired. I'm leaving now. I'll visit you another day." After saying that, County Magistrate Liu hurriedly turned around and kicked the nearest runner's ass as he said angrily, "What are you still doing here? Go back." In the astonished and puzzled eyes of the crowd, several bailiffs were kicked on their butts and all of them were kicked down the stairs one by one. Even the figure of County Magistrate Liu soon disappeared from everyone's sight. This Liu Dio, what the hell is he doing? Li Jianren said angrily, not expecting such a thing to happen. County Magistrate Liu came and returned. This dramatic scene stunned everyone for a long time. Qin Yu cupped his fists forward and said, I admire you, I admire you. I didn't expect the Jingqing magistrate to be Li Xianbu's man. Li Yi quickly shook his head and said, You can eat whatever you want, but you can't say whatever you want. Young Duke Qin, you have to take responsibility for what you say. Impudent. Prince Duanyang snorted coldly and said, How dare you cover up a criminal and collude with an official of the imperial court? This, what Duke Duanyang? Li Yi looked at Prince Duanyang and said, I'm afraid that Duke Duanyang can't accuse me of this. We're all smart people. You all know what kind of person young Duke Qin is. It's not enough for him to flirt with an innocent family once. Now he even wants to put the blame on others. Let me make it clear. Today, none of you can take him away. Qin Yu's face was gloomy, and the others looked at each other. This time, they really shed all pretenses of cordiality. Bastard! King Hui's fief was in Chuzhou, and Prince Duanyang was like a crown prince in Chuzhou. He had never been treated so arrogantly. He pointed at Li Yi's nose and scolded. Li Yi looked at him and said seriously, I'm a person who can't stand being scolded. If you scold me, I'll hit you. Prince Duanyang was stunned for a moment. Instead of getting angry, he laughed, Hit me. Do you have the guts? Li Jianren took a step back, Cui Shixin took a step back, and Chen Lisan took a step back to avoid being affected. There used to be two people who had the same idea as Prince Duanyang. Among them, one was lying at home for 2 days, and the other was lying for 2 months. One was standing in front of them now, and the other was still in the prince's mansion. In terms of status, which one of them was inferior to Prince Duanyang? Guards! Royal Prince Duanyang coldly snorted and said, "Go in and arrest those two women. Send them to the government office. I want to see how bold this official Li is. Let's see if he dares to stop us." He looked at Li Yi and said with a sneer, "I am helping the imperial court to arrest criminals. If someone tries to stop me and gets hurt, don't blame others." This was a threat. Prince Duanyang believed that with such a legitimate reason, he would be confident even when facing the emperor. Li Yi took a step back, walked into the room, and said, "I advise Prince Duanyang not to come in." The playboys behind Prince Duanyang were vigilant. Although they said so, from their expressions, they all hoped that Prince Duanyang would go in. Could it be that he really planned to beat up Royal Prince Duanyang here? Did he really think that he could be lawless because he had intermittent hysteria? The same reason could be used once, but if it was used a second time, many people would not agree. Prince Duanyang sneered, strode into the room, and said, "I came in, what can you do to me?" Li Yi kicked Prince Duanyang's chest and kicked him out of the room. Prince Duanyang's body hit the railing before he fell to the ground. He clutched his chest, and his facial features twisted together. He stretched out a hand with difficulty, pointed at Li Yi, and said, "Take him down." A few armed men rushed into the room and surrounded Li Yi. From the way he had easily kicked the regional king out of the room, they could tell that he had some skills. The few of them placed their hands on the hilts of their swords. Clutching his chest, Royal Prince Duanyang pushed through the crowd and walked in with a gloomy expression. He pulled out a long saber from the waist of a guard and coldly said, "Harboring a criminal and attempting to assassinate a royal prince. This prince will now bring people to arrest you. If you dare to resist again, don't blame this prince." Qin Yu's expression was as calm as an ancient well. He calmly looked at Li Yi. He was as bold as ever. At this moment, Royal Prince Duanyang had been dragged into this. Not only would he not be able to protect the two women, but he would also be in a lot of trouble. Xing Zumo ran over from behind with a pale face. She did not expect things to develop like this. She was about to speak, but she saw Li Yi wave his hand and said to Prince Duanyang, "Swords have no eyes. Prince Duanyang should be careful. Fighting and killing is not good. Can't you just sit down and talk?" Talk. Prince Duanyang's chest rose and fell, and his breathing was rapid. It took him a lot of effort to suppress the urge to raise his knife and kill. Li Yi sighed, pointed at Prince Duanyang, who was holding a knife, and the aggressive people next to him, and said to the gray-robed old man, "Protect him." The old man nodded and opened a window behind him. Prince Duanyang's expression froze, and he suspected that he had heard wrong. Qin Yu's expression changed slightly, and he raised his head to look at Li Yi. Seeing that his expression was still calm, he did not know why, but the feeling in his heart that something bad was about to happen became stronger. What did he just say? Behind them, Cui Shixin asked in confusion. "Go home." Li Jianren thought for a moment and said, "Go home." Cui Shixin shook his head. Things had already come to this, did he think he could still leave? Chapter 540. I'd like to see where you can go." Prince Duanyang sneered with a trace of sarcasm on his face. However, this trace of sarcasm soon turned into doubt and he turned to look downstairs. Rumble. An unusually orderly sound of footsteps suddenly rang in their ears. Looking down the stairs, they saw that the shopkeeper and waiters of the restaurant, as well as the guests downstairs, were all squatting on the ground with their hands over their heads. A group of armored guards filed in through the door. The arrows in the hands of more than 10 soldiers in the front row were already aimed at them. The sharpness of the arrowheads was chilling. Imperial Guards. What's going on? Why are the Imperial Guards here? The more than 10 playboys were immediately scared out of their wits. The Imperial Guards were the Emperor's guards. Their duty was to guard the palace and protect the Emperor. Every time the imperial guards appeared, they represented the emperor's will. Who dared to move at this time? The people upstairs, put down your weapons. A man who looked like a general walked out from the back and looked at them coldly. Clang! Royal Prince Duanyang turned around to look at this scene. His forehead was covered with cold sweat and the saber in his hand fell to the ground. He was terrified, but he still didn't know what was going on. Why were the palace guards here? The few servants who were holding weapons naturally squatted on the ground with their hands over their heads. Not to mention them, if they disobeyed, these imperial guards even had the power to shoot Prince Duanyang on the spot. Who were they? In the next moment, countless figures appeared in the restaurant. A group of imperial guards came up the stairs. Including Qin Yu, a dozen or so hedonistic young masters leaned against the wall. Cold arrows were pointed at them, and they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. I came late to the rescue. Please forgive me, princesses. The guard general walked to the door, knelt on one knee and said in a low voice. Princess. Prince Duanyang only felt that his vision was a little black. He finally knew why County Magistrate Lu just turned around and left. Damn, why was the princess here? What did he do just now? Did he use a saber in front of the princess? And there were two of them. At this time, Prince Duanyang was not only a little black. If it weren't for the wall, he would have collapsed. Qin Yu's face was also pale. Who would have thought that someone as noble as the princess would actually eat in such a restaurant? If the two of them were already in such a state, then the clothes of those whose statuses were lower than theirs were already drenched in cold sweat. They could feel the murderous aura from the guards even when they turned their heads. This time, they were afraid that something big had happened. Aya, what are you doing? You can't even let me eat properly. The Tsundra Lolita stood up from her seat and pulled Yongning's hand. She said, how disappointing. Let's go back and eat our braised prawns. Li Yi shook his head. With such a thing happening, he probably couldn't eat the braised prawns anymore. Just look at this royal Prince Duanyang and little Duke Qin. Do they have nothing better to do? Why did they have to provoke the two princesses? Can't you just sit down and eat? Li Yi felt that Miss Sang's breathing was a little disordered and her body was trembling a few times. He hurriedly turned around to support her and asked, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Xing Zumo waved her hand. After she stood firm, she looked at Li Yi and asked, Princess. Princess. Li Yi shrugged, pointed to the two little girls, and introduced them. Let me introduce you again. This is Princess Shaning, and this is Princess Yongning. You. Help me a little. Xing Zumo held Li Yi with one hand and looked at the two girls that she couldn't be more familiar with a face full of disbelief. Xini and Bing Ning, weren't they his? Weren't they the children of his distant relatives? How could they become princesses? In other words, the one that she had hugged and kissed and almost fell on the swing was actually the princess. This news was so unexpected and shocking that she couldn't accept it for a while. Xiao Chui, who was on the side, looked even paler than before. She grabbed the corner of Xing Zumo's clothes, and her body was trembling slightly. Let's go. Li Yi sighed. The outside world was indeed dangerous. A good meal could end up like this. This time, he probably wouldn't even be able to go home. When he walked out of the door, he looked at Qin Yu and Duanyang, who were squatting in the corner, and shook his head helplessly. It was simply a sin. Xing Zumo and Xiao Chui came out in a daze, and even the matter of young Duke Qin was temporarily forgotten. Outside the Drunken Moon Inn, the Imperial Guard General said to Li Yi, Lord Li, this matter concerns Her Royal Highness. Please come with us to the palace. Li Yi nodded and said to the Li family guard standing at the door, send Miss Zumo back first. Tell the madam that I may come back later. The Imperial Guard General hesitated for a moment and said, Lord, these two girls, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "This matter has nothing to do with them. Let's forget it." The Imperial Guard General looked at the gray-robed old man beside him. Seeing him nod, he didn't speak anymore. Xing Zumo's mind was a bit chaotic at the moment. She really should go back and think about it. When she was sent away by the guard, her expression was still a bit blank. When Li Yi and the two princesses returned to the palace, they could take a carriage, but the others didn't have this treatment. The distinguished young Duke Qin, Duanyang, and more than 10 famous playboys in the capital were escorted by the imperial guards through the streets and alleys. It could be said that they were in the limelight. Since it concerned the two princesses, it naturally couldn't be treated lightly. The imperial guards had already entered the palace to report to the emperor. At the same time, news was also spread to some of the noble families in the capital. In the Ministry of Revenue, an assistant minister with the surname Xing had just come out from the minister's office with a slightly excited expression on his face. Some of the news that the minister had just informed him made him feel quite proud. Everyone knew that the Ministry of Revenue was in short supply of mathematics talents. After all the twists and turns, his son had finally entered the mathematics school. If he wanted to work in the Ministry of Revenue in the future, it might be much easier to use his connections. When the king of Shu ascended the throne, the Xing family, which had suffered a great disaster before, would probably rise again. Thinking of this, his face naturally revealed a trace of a smile. However, this smile did not last for long as a person hurriedly ran in from outside. After seeing him, the person said in a panic, "Lord Xing, something bad has happened. The young master has been captured by the imperial guards." "What?" Hearing this, Assistant Minister Zhang's expression changed drastically. He immediately asked, "What is going on? How did he offend the imperial guards?" The person shook his head and said, "This subordinate doesn't know the specifics. I only know that His Majesty is very angry." Including Duanyang, young Duke Qin, and more than 10 young masters of noble families, they are all kneeling in front of the palace gates. His Majesty. His Majesty is very angry. Assistant Minister Zhang's expression became even more terrified. He immediately said, "Prepare the carriage, we're going to the Qin residence." At this moment, there was more than one person who had the same reaction as Assistant Minister Zhang. In the Duke Qin residence, a woman said in a panic, "What? Li Sen has been captured. Master, you have to save Li Sen." Chen Chong's expression was gloomy. After a moment, he strode out of the residence. "Prepare the carriage, I want to enter the palace." In the Qin residence, Minister Qin frowned as he looked at the panicking Assistant Minister Zhang. However, he didn't know what exactly had happened. Not long after, a carriage drove out of the Qin residence and headed in the direction of the palace gates. More than 100 imperial guards escorting more than 10 hedonistic sons through the streets was a shocking scene. The commoners of the capital had never seen such a scene in their entire lives. Within an hour, all sorts of rumors had spread throughout the capital. At the same time, many of the wealthy families and officials' residences were in an even greater uproar. Chapter 541. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Li Yi looked up at Emperor Jing and said helplessly, "Your Majesty, if you look at me like that, I will be embarrassed." Emperor Jing raised his eyebrows and said angrily, "You will be embarrassed." His words were a bit too much. It was human nature to be embarrassed. Unless one's skin was thick to a certain extent, everyone would have this kind of feeling. Was the old emperor scolding him in a roundabout way? What a heartless guy. Over the past year, he had helped him a lot. Not to mention the matter of Tian Fa, when the people of the Qi kingdom came from far away to humiliate the Jing kingdom, who helped the old emperor to save the face of the Jing kingdom when the Jing kingdom was at a disadvantage. When there was a shortage of mathematicians in the kingdom of Jing, who had spared no effort and stayed up all night to compile teaching materials. who had spared no effort to cultivate a group of qualified mathematicians. Had they reaped any benefits from this? Besides, when his eldest daughter was besieged by the courtiers, who tried all kinds of ways to help her solve those troubles and recruited a large number of younger brothers, younger sisters. Even his 2 youngest daughters, he had accompanied them for 2 months and played with them. One of them even wanted to rely on him for a lifetime. Was it easy for him? The royal family was a group of ungrateful wolves. Li Yi used his own experience to prove that this sentence was correct. Isn't this a trap you set for them? Emperor Jing stood up and looked at him and asked. Li Yi was stunned and said, I have no grudge against them. Why would I harm them? No grudge. Emperor Jing was stunned and said, You said no grudge. Li Yi thought for a while and it seemed that there were some grudges. However, how long had he been in the capital? How many enemies could he have made? It was nothing more than the king of Shu, the Cui family, the Qin family, the Qin family, Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works, Assistant Minister Xing of the Ministry of Revenue, the Ministry of Rights. There were only dozens of people recorded in the small notebook. Was it a lot? The reason why he had offended these people was because he wanted to help the old emperor, but now, he was blaming himself instead. He was an ingrate. Li Yi said with some grievance, Your Majesty, you can go and ask. I just took the 2 princesses out for a meal today. I didn't provoke anyone, but I encountered such a thing. I'm also very helpless. Jing Di looked back at the gray-clothed old man in the corner. The old man nodded helplessly. This time, it was really not County Magistrate Li's fault. The princess left the palace secretly, so she couldn't easily reveal her identity. In addition to hiding the princess's identity, County Uncle Li was really bullied by others this time. This minister of offerings in the palace would naturally not lie to him. Emperor Jing looked at Li Yi with a puzzled expression. Was it really not him who was causing trouble this time? He was indeed a little depressed just now. The 2 princesses leaving the palace had been hidden from all the courtiers. After this incident, he was afraid that this matter could not be hidden anymore. There would be many people making a big fuss about this matter. He was afraid that he would have a headache for a while. At this moment, seeing Li Yi's expression, he had some doubts about his guess, but he also felt a little guilty. Forget it, forget it. You can go. In order to cover up the embarrassment, Jing Di waved his hand and said, I'll leave. Li Yi sighed and turned to walk out of the hall. His back looked bleak and lonely, which made Jing Di feel a little more guilty. The gray-clothed old man behind him respectfully asked, Your Majesty, Prince Duanyang and young Duke Qin. Jing Di's face turned cold and said coldly, They offended the princess. Let them kneel first. 10 hours later, each of them will be punished with 40 floggings. Let the palace guards execute it. When Li Yi walked out of the palace gate with his hands behind his back, he looked to the side with interest. More than a dozen people were facing the palace wall and kneeling uniformly. It was a different scene. Unfortunately, it was already autumn. If it was 3 months ago, when the summer was the hottest, they would not kneel much. They would just kneel here for 4 hours, and then they could ask someone to collect the corpses. What a pity, what a pity. He sighed. In the distance, Fong was already sitting in the carriage waiting for him. The weather was not hot, but the foreheads of Prince Duanyang, young Duke Qin, and other playboys were full of sweat. No one thought that there were 2 princesses sitting in that room. If they had known, they would not have dared to use a knife in front of the little princess even if they had 10 more guts. Just now, their lord had been here and was now in the palace asking to see the emperor. This time, it was impossible to kill them, but they were afraid that they would lose a layer of skin. Thinking of County Earl Li, who had been calm from the beginning to the end, everyone could not help but gnash their teeth with hatred. He simply dug a pit in advance, waiting for them to jump into it. From the first time he met young Duke Qin, he had been guiding them step by step. Later, he attacked Prince Duanyang and deliberately angered him. It must be his plan. After sorting out this matter in their hearts, everyone was secretly shocked. This seemingly harmless county earldom was really too sinister. After this matter, more than half of the people present listed him as a person who could never be offended in this life. At this time, in the hall of diligent government, a large number of people knelt down. I failed to teach my son well and offended the princess. Please punish me, Your Majesty. An official knelt on the ground and said loudly, I am guilty. There were more than a dozen people kneeling in the hall. At this moment, they all knelt on the ground and said loudly. Prime Minister Qin, who was noble, stood quietly with Prime Minister Shen and did not speak. You have taught a group of good sons. Emperor Jing glanced at the crowd and said coldly, flirting with good families, distorting black and white, threatening important officials of the imperial court with a knife, and frightening the two princesses. I would like to ask, who gave them the courage to do so? It was rare for His Majesty to be angry. Everyone was silent and did not dare to speak again. Emperor Jing looked at them and said coldly, Are the laws of our Jing kingdom just decorations in their eyes? The officials could only bow their heads and listen to the scolding. Their children had made such a big mistake. It was nothing to be scolded by His Majesty. It would be good if they were scolded, but it would be a big problem if they were not scolded. 40 floggings were personally carried out by the imperial guards. It was estimated that they would have to lie at home for at least 10 days or half a month before they could get up. Of course, this was already His Majesty's mercy for the sake of many of them. Unfortunately, it was said that the boy of the Qin family had just recovered from a serious injury. If these 40 floggings were carried out, he would probably die. Of course, His Majesty Prime Minister Qin still had to take into account. He would not be beaten to death, but at least he would be half dead. After a quarter of an hour, Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, Take him back and discipline him well. If there is a next time, I will not let him off so easily. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your mercy. After hearing the punishment, everyone felt relieved and quickly said. At this moment, an assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, who had just stood up, suddenly stepped forward and asked, May I ask Your Majesty, why are Princess Shaning and Princess Yongning not in the palace but in a small restaurant in the capital? As soon as these words came out, the expressions of several people immediately changed. Now that this matter was brought up, had Assistant Minister Chen lost his mind? Emperor Jing raised his eyebrows and said, Princess Yongning is suffering from an illness of loss of her soul. These days, she has been receiving treatment outside the palace. For the sake of her safety, this matter should not be made public. No one could find fault with this reason. Assistant Minister Chen nodded and raised his head to ask, What about Princess Shaning? Emperor Jing glanced at Assistant Minister Chen and took a sip of the tea on the table. He waved his hand at Changde and asked, How many floggings did I say they should be flogged? Reporting to Your Majesty, 40 floggings. Changde bowed and said. The two princesses have suffered quite a fright this time. 40 floggings is still too little. Change it to 80. Emperor Jing ordered and then turned his head to ask, What did Assistant Minister Chen just say? I have nothing to say. Assistant Minister Chen's expression changed. He gritted his teeth and lowered his head as he spoke. Imperial Father, quickly come and see what our new bracelets are like. Isn't it beautiful? The two princesses who had suffered quite a fright ran in from outside hand in hand. The proud Lolita ran in front of Emperor Jing and waved her hand, her expression extremely proud. Chapter 542. Not long after, several courtiers walked out of the Hall of Diligent Government with their heads drooped. This time, because of his disappointing children, he was scolded by His Majesty, and his mood was extremely depressed. However, even if His Majesty did not punish them, they would still teach those boys a lesson. Rushing into the place where Her Royal Highness ate with a knife, they would say, "You mother of king want to rebel, even I don't dare to do that." As for why the two little princesses were in the restaurant in the capital, was it important? Everyone glared at Assistant Minister Chen vaguely. Everyone knew that it was not appropriate for the two little princesses to leave the palace, but he actually mentioned it to His Majesty at this time. Was he stupid? However, His Majesty's reaction just now was far beyond everyone's expectations. His Majesty, how did it become like this? Finally, someone could not help but ask the person beside him with a complicated tone. The Emperor had always actively listened to the reasonable suggestions of the court officials. It was not in accordance with the rules of etiquette to allow the young princess to leave the palace. It was normal for an official from the Ministry of Rights or an imperial censor to bring up this matter, but they believed that if Assistant Minister Chen had said one more word, it wouldn't just be a matter of 80 strokes. How could the once wise and selfless His Majesty, how could he, become like this? This was not the His Majesty they were familiar with. The few of them shook their heads and sighed helplessly. This matter could not be considered as truly over. In the shortest time possible, they had to inform all their close colleagues or the censors that they could not mention the matter of the little princess leaving the palace during the morning court session the next day. 80 floggings was enough. At this time, only Prime Minister Qin was left in the Hall of Diligent Government. "Is there anything else, Minister Qin?" Emperor Jing looked down and asked him. "Your Majesty." Prime Minister Qin opened his mouth. Okay, no need to say more. I understand." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "I will ask them to be more lenient. However, Qin Yu is the leader of this matter. If I let him go alone, I am afraid the others will not be convinced. He can be spared from death, but he cannot escape punishment." "I thank your Majesty." Prime Minister Qin let out a long sigh and bowed deeply. Emperor Jing looked at his back as he left. His back was slightly stooped. He sighed and said, "It's time to discipline this child of the Qin family. The people are already complaining about his behavior. Don't let the Qin family's century-old reputation be ruined." Qin Xiang's footsteps paused. There was an unconcealable disappointment on his face. When he stepped out of the hall, his back was even more stooped. There was going to be a lot of excitement in Jingdu today. A few dozen steps away from the entrance of the palace, gongs and drums could be heard, firecrackers were set off, and red flags were fluttering in the wind. There was a sea of people. The black mass of people stretched as far as the eye could see. Below the palace walls, a dozen or so stools were arranged in a row. The famous hedonistic sons of the capital were sprawled on top of them. Shadows of sticks danced in the air as they wailed in pain. After hearing the emperor's decree, the imperial guards had already conserved some of their strength. Otherwise, if they were to really follow the standard military practice of 80 strokes of the cane, none of these hedonistic sons who had their bodies hollowed out by wine and women would be able to return alive. When it came to flogging, they were very experienced. Whether it was on the buttocks or the back, regardless of whether there were no scars on the outside and dozens of strokes of the cane could still kill them, or whether it was a wretched appearance, but in reality, it was just a superficial wound. They could recuperate at home for half a month before being able to walk. These were all things that needed to be paid attention to. This time, it was naturally impossible to beat those hedonistic sons to death. However, the pain was so great that they would probably be unable to forget it for the rest of their lives. With every stroke of the cane, the cries became even more tragic. What is going on? Who are those people? You don't even know. The news has long spread in the capital. A dozen hedonistic sons of hedonistic sons have taken liberties with innocent people. They actually dared to take liberties with Her Royal Highness. Aren't they courting death? I already said that this group of people have done all kinds of bad things. Sooner or later, they will know who is stronger. They deserve it. The commoners liked to see this kind of excitement. Wasn't it fun to eat melon seeds of different flavors while listening to the screams? Naturally, there were also rows of carriages parked at the side. The carriages had soft cushions on them, and the outside of the carriages were pasted with the insignia of various families. They were all well-known figures in the capital. However, today, while their heads were still there, their faces were completely lost. My pitiful children, His Majesty is so cruel. He has already asked Imperial Consort Shui to plead for mercy on their behalf. Why is there still no movement from the palace? Listening to the screams outside, there were even sounds of sobbing, cursing, sighing, and the sound of eating melon seeds coming from within some of the carriages. Bah! Outside a carriage, a middle-aged man spat out the skin of a melon seed. He looked at the people under the palace wall who were being beaten with a cane. His face showed an expression of interest. Wu Er, do you think the red dates or the garlic flavor tastes better? A large man beside him scratched his head and said, Fifth Master, I think the 5-spice flavor tastes better. The middle-aged man dragged out his voice. Seeing this, the large man immediately said, the garlic flavor. Of course, the garlic flavor tastes better. The middle-aged man threw the bag in his hand over and said, Since the garlic flavor tastes better, these are all for you. The large man's face showed a bitter expression. He glanced around and his eyes suddenly lit up. He said, Fifth Master, it seems that the beating is over. Should we go over and bring the little Duke over? In reality, beside the surrounding carriages, countless figures had already jogged over to the palace wall and carried their young masters back. They had him lie down on the soft cushion that had been prepared in the carriage. That fifth master waved his hand somewhat dispiritedly. 2 men quickly ran over and carried the fainted Qin Yu back. When they saw a certain part of his body, even though they were made of iron, they couldn't help but suck in a breath. This was simply beaten to a pulp. Naturally, the 2 of them deeply sympathized with their little Duke's experience. The outside world was still too dangerous for the little Duke. How good would it be to be grounded at home? At least he wouldn't be beaten into a sieve. Wu Er glanced at the inside of the carriage and covered his eyes. He secretly sighed and said, What a sin. After the few playboys were punished, they were quickly carried back. There was no more excitement to watch. The people also dispersed in disappointment, leaving behind a ground full of melon seed shells. At the entrance of the Hall of Diligent Government, Changde bowed to the woman in the palace dress in front of him and said, Your Highness, please go back. The 2 little princesses were frightened today. His Majesty is comforting them inside. He won't see anyone. After a while, looking at the sky, Concubine Chui estimated that there was already a result outside the palace. Concubine Chui shook her head. She was afraid that what her younger sister had asked of her could not be done. At this time, in the Hall of Diligent Government, the proud Lolita excitedly told Emperor Jing about what she had seen and heard these days. She danced with joy. Father, you don't know. Sir's rocking cart is very fun. And that uncle is very strong. Also, I went fishing with Sir. Those stinky fish actually don't eat candied haws. And I also have a rabbit that I keep at Sir's house. I want to see it in a few days. Emperor Jing held Yongning in his arms and touched Princess Shanning's head. He asked with a smile, You weren't frightened today, right? The proud Lolita shook her head and said angrily, I wasn't frightened. It's just that I haven't eaten enough. I said that I would go to Sir's house to eat braised prawns, sweet and sour carp, braised lion's head. Sir also said that he would take us out to barbecue tomorrow. Seeing that his daughter kept talking about Sir, Emperor Jing was depressed. What was so good about Li Yi? Why did his 2 daughters like him so much? At this moment, the proud Lolita seemed to think of something again. She mysteriously attached herself to Emperor Jing's ear and said, "Father, in 2 years, can you issue a decree to betroth Shaning to Sir?" The expression on Emperor Jing's face froze. After a while, outside the Hall of Diligent Government, Changde heard the movement coming from inside the hall. He looked back and shook his head slightly. It seemed that His Majesty was really angered by those playboys this time. Otherwise, how could he even use the word beast? Chapter 543. The maids of the Leaf family were discussing in the yard which young master had his buttocks smashed in front of the palace gate yesterday. They didn't know whether they had eaten a bear's heart or a leopard's gall. It was fine if they bullied good people in daily life, but now they even dared to flirt with Her Royal Highness. They deserved to be beaten to death. Xiao Huan was usually very interested in the gossips in the capital, but today, she had a bitter face. She had eaten too many melon seeds in the past 2 days, and her tongue was blistered and painful. In just a short while, she had already drunk 2 cups of fruit juice. Li Yi was a little bored in the past 2 days. The Heroes' Conference was approaching, and Mississippi Liu was a little busy. Many real martial arts masters also came, so he took Rui to hold the fort. It seemed that he was determined to win the position of the chief of the Wulin League. The 2 little princesses had actually run out of the palace. Although for some reason, the courtiers and censors seemed to have reached some sort of tacit agreement. No one made a big fuss about this matter. However, it was unlikely that Yong Ning and Shou Ning would be able to leave the palace in a short period of time. These bastards. There were still a few days before Yong Ning could return to the palace. Now they suffered a big loss. He had to find a chance to talk to the old emperor and see if he could make up for it. However, this matter had to be put off for a few days. These days, every time he thought of the old emperor, he would have an ominous premonition. It was better to see him less these days. Today, he had to go to Miss Zhang's place to see her. She must have been frightened by what happened yesterday. When he was about to go out, he met an unexpected person at the door. County Magistrate Liu smiled and cupped his hands, saying, "Thank you, Lord Li. If it weren't for you yesterday, I'm afraid I would have been in danger." Speaking of which, half a year ago, it was Li Yi who called himself this official. In less than a year, their positions had been reversed. "Someone, bring the gift here." County Magistrate Liu waved his hand behind him, and then said to Li Yi, "It's just a small gift to show my respect." Although it was a meager gift, considering his family's wealth, it was considered a huge loss. Thinking back to yesterday's events, it was too dangerous. If it had been him who had led the bailiffs into the room, he would have ended up the same way as those foppish nobles. However, he did not have such a deep background in the capital, so the situation would have been even more serious. Li Yi's advice yesterday was no less than a life-saving grace to him. 2 princesses. After receiving the exact news yesterday, he was really shocked and broke into a cold sweat. "We're all on the same side. Lord Liu, you're treating me like an outsider." Li Yi smiled and waved his hand. After he came to this world, he had spent the first few days in Qing and Prefecture. Thus, when he saw Liu Yi and County Magistrate Liu in Jingdo, he felt closer than other people. What's more, County Magistrate Liu's position as the capital magistrate was beneficial to him. County Magistrate Liu said hurriedly, "Etiquette is necessary." Since he said so, Li Yi naturally couldn't refuse. When the time came, he would tell Uncle Li to send someone to visit County Magistrate Liu's mansion. The standard of the gift would be the same as this one. Li Yi stretched out his hand and said with a smile, "Lord Liu, come in and have a seat." County Magistrate Liu could see that Li Yi was going out. Although he wanted to go in for a cup of tea and improve their relationship, he couldn't disturb him now. He cupped his hands and said, "I only want to thank you in person for your great kindness." I won't disturb you anymore, Lord Li. The guests who came to the Li family all had a good habit of only giving gifts but not entering the door. They didn't even invite them in, so they didn't even have to pay for a cup of tea. Li Yi couldn't help but start to think whether it was because the feng shui of this mansion was too good. County Magistrate Lu also left in a hurry without entering the door. Li Yi shook his head and called Fang, followed by a few guards of the Li family, to the direction of the capital. After being trained by second granduncle for a period of time, Fang's strength had improved by leaps and bounds. Even the carefully selected guards in the imperial palace couldn't withstand a single punch from him. The gray-robed old man beside Yong Ning had stayed here for 2 months. In the beginning, he could easily defeat Fang with a wave of his sleeve. Later, he would hide from him when he saw him. Later, according to him, if it was a life-and-death fight, he could take Fang's life within 30 moves. But if it was an ordinary fight, this old man wouldn't be able to withstand a few blows from him. His skills were getting better and better, but his character was getting more and more cowardly. A few days ago, he was discovered by his mother-in-law for hiding some money and was not allowed to enter the mansion for 2 days. He became the laughingstock of the mansion. Sitting in the carriage, Fang asked while driving, "Young master, are you going to Miss Zhang's place again?" Li Yi raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean by again?" Only then did Fang realize that he had asked the wrong question, so he corrected himself. "Young master, are you going back to Miss Zhang's place today?" Climbing into the carriage again, Fang sighed and leaned against the carriage. A rare trace of disappointment appeared on his face as he asked, "Young master, have you never thought of taking a concubine? Why, do you want to take Lil Hong back?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. Fang shook his head and said, "There's nothing between me and Lil Hong." Li Yi curled his lips. Perhaps even Fang himself didn't believe his own words. There was nothing. There was nothing about running to the jadeite courtyard every 2 or 3 days. There was nothing about hiding some money to buy gifts for her. If there was nothing, how could a rough man's mind become so delicate? Who was he trying to fool? Fang suddenly turned his head and looked at Li Yi, asking seriously, "Young master, have you never thought of taking Miss Xing back? And that Miss Ruoqing, I don't believe that you can't tell that they like you." Li Yi's expression froze. Rui still had a knot in her heart that she couldn't get over. Although she said so, if he really did that, what kind of position would he put her in? Although it was uncertain what would happen in the future, based on the current way of getting along, it was the most important. He looked up at Fang. This wasn't important. What was important was this guy really Fang? Although his memory of old Fang was no longer limited to the simple and honest man who gave them the pheasants that he had hunted with great difficulty and gave them to his family, the man in front of him looked like he had experienced the vicissitudes of life, worry, wisdom, and a certain emotion that seemed to have settled after seeing through the affairs of the world. Was this really old Fang? "Fang, you've changed." Li Yi looked at him for a long time and said with a sigh, "Young master, people will change." Fang looked at him and said, "You will change, I will change, eldest miss will change, second miss will also change, all of us will change." At this moment, Fang was very much like a philosopher. Li Yi suddenly felt that he had underestimated Fang, underestimated everyone. "Young master, don't talk, let me be alone." Li Yi waved his hand, his voice was indescribably tired. Li Yi always came to this small courtyard during the day, so he couldn't see Ruoqing very often. But Miss Zhang was always there. As the chief designer, she only needed to draw in the room, so she didn't have to run around. Today, she wasn't in the room, but sitting at the stone table in the courtyard, staring at the swing under the tree in a daze. Li Yi let out a sigh and sat opposite her. Xing Zumo looked up at him and didn't say anything. "Fang, this bastard, made me think about life with just a few words, but I went to the Jade Courtyard to talk about life with Little Red." After a moment of silence, Li Yi felt the atmosphere was a little awkward, so he looked at Miss Xing and said, "How about, you sing a song. Sing Zumo had learned a lot of new songs these days, which were all taught by Yongning. Maybe she also felt the atmosphere was a little awkward, so she asked, "What do you want to sing?" Li Yi bowed his head and thought for a moment. After a moment, he looked up at her. "How about 18 touches?" Chapter 544. What did you say? Sing Zumo looked up at Li Yi, her eyes flashing with a dangerous light. 18 what? 18 turns. Li Yi looked at her and asked doubtfully, "Haven't you heard of it?" "Let me sing a few lines for you." He cleared his throat, and there was an explosive sound. "Yo, the descendant of the mountain, love the sun." Clang! In the kitchen, Xiao Chui, who was washing the dishes, was scared out of her wits by the sudden shout outside. The bowl she had just washed fell to the ground and shattered. In the courtyard, Tsing Zumo's face darkened. Before Li Yi sang the next line, she decisively covered his mouth. "This is a folk song from our hometown. It seems a little wild and not suitable for you to sing." Li Yi gasped. He was almost choked to death by her just now. "Isn't your hometown in Qing Prefecture?" Tsing Zumo glanced at him. "I'm talking about the hometown in my dream." "Oh, that's not important." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "How about I teach you 2 songs from my hometown? One is called The Most Dazzling Ethnic Style, and the other is called Little Apple. Listen to it, it's quite nice." This time, Li Yi's mouth was covered before he could even make a sound. He was a little regretful. If the middle-aged women in this world also danced in the square, he would definitely build a few more big squares in the capital for free. Tsing Zumo looked at him and asked with some anger in her tone, "Didn't you say that Sini and Bing Ning are the children of your relatives?" The 2 little girls were gone, and Miss Seng was not even willing to sing. It was time to reflect on herself. Yes, the surname Li is one family in the world. Within 500 generations, there must be some relatives. Li Yi thought this explanation was perfect. Sing Zumo glared at him again. After coming back yesterday, she recovered from the shock and thought about it carefully. Naturally, she could understand why Li Yi had concealed their identities. But yesterday in the Drunken Moon Tower, she was really scared, and naturally had some complaints about him. Xiao Chui did not even dare to sleep alone last night. She spent the whole night asking her if they would be arrested because she had pinched the princess's face. Would they punish her for being disrespectful? Of course, there were other reasons for her anger. Xane. Princess Yongning's words had disturbed her for many days, but Xane didn't say anything, as if nothing had happened. In fact, she had been suppressing her anger recently. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "You don't have to worry. The princess is not that scary. She will still be the same as before. Just pretend that you don't know anything about this." Ordinary people had a natural fear of the royal family. If they were to be punished for being disrespectful to the royal family, then even if they had a few hundred heads, it would not be enough to chop them off. Instead of worrying about this, it was better to worry about whether that damn pervert Qin Yu would secretly play some tricks. But thinking about it, it was not very likely. He heard that in front of the palace gate yesterday, he was beaten unconscious on the spot. Li Yi guessed that the old emperor had held back. Otherwise, the Qin's residents would be preparing for a funeral today. As for the other good-for-nothings, including that royal Prince Duanyang, they wouldn't be able to do anything for the next 10 days to half a month. Now that they had all been dealt with, it was likely that the capital would be much quieter in the near future. As one of the 3 heroes of the capital, he was still very competent and inadvertently did something practical for the common people. However, this kind of thing was hard to guarantee. Who knew what the bottom line of those bastards was? The security around the small courtyard still needed to be strengthened. The current situation was no longer the willow leaf stockade. Not to mention the subordinates of Mississippi Lou, just the number of experts recruited from the brothels was already uncountable. They spread out like a net in the capital. As long as one side made a move, countless people would gather in a short period of time. These things were all done by Lu Luo. He was familiar with the Jianghu and had a high prestige. In addition, he alone accounted for more than 90% of the intelligence of the two brothers. He could be said to be extremely intelligent and rarely made mistakes. All the affairs were arranged in an orderly manner. Many accidents or sudden incidents could also be handled with a strong hand. Mississippi Lou had never been convinced by anyone, and he was one of them. Otherwise, with Mississippi Lou managing the many matters of the hero ranking with passion, it would not take long for the whole thing to collapse. Don't rush to expand the shop. If there are smart people under you, you can train them in the direction of a shopkeeper or a manager. Of course, the foundation must be clean. Don't let Ruoqing run around all day. There is no end to the work, got it? Xing Sumo waved her hand impatiently, as if she wanted to see him off. She was a little strange today. Li Yi counted the days and calculated a little, and he didn't find it strange anymore. He stood up and said, "Then I'll go back first." Xing Sumo waved her hand again, stood up, and walked into the house. Li Yi sighed. When he walked out the door, Fong was already squatting beside him, waiting. Seeing Li Yi come out, he stood up. "Young master, don't talk." Li Yi hurriedly waved his hand, got into the carriage, and said, "Let's go around the city." At this time, it was still early before dark. Rui and the others would probably return in 2 to 4 hours. He would go to the brothel and some shops in the capital from time to time. At the door of a brothel in the city, when Li Yi got out of the carriage, another carriage happened to pass by. The elegant young man in the carriage was holding a thick book in his hand and reading it attentively. The carriage slowly drove through a few streets until there were fewer people on the street, and it stopped in front of a high door. The servant at the door was about to go forward to ask, but when he saw the sign on the carriage, his face froze. He immediately stepped forward respectfully and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." The young man got out of the carriage, waved his hand, and asked, "Is Prime Minister Qin in the residence?" "He just returned." The servant quickly said, "Your Highness, please." "Your Highness, have you been reading these days?" After a servant served tea, Prime Minister Qin looked at the king and asked. The king said with a smile, "In the past 2 months, I have been lying in bed with nothing to do, but I have read a lot. Now I am used to it, and I can't put it down for a while. It's good to read more." Prime Minister Qin nodded and said, "However, even if it's reading, you need to focus on something. Your Highness should learn more about the mind of an emperor and the way of governing a country. I will send someone to send a few books to you tomorrow." "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin." The king cupped his hands and thanked him. Prime Minister Qin's face showed a thoughtful expression. He paused and said, "I know that Your Highness has a grudge against the Earl of Chang and County, Li Yi. However, he is a talented man. If he is willing to assist you, he will definitely be your greatest help in the future. It's not a big deal to be young and impetuous. I was also young once. Those who achieve great things never care about trifles. I hope Your Highness can let bygones be bygones. As for the Earl of Chang and County, I will fight for it for Your Highness. What do you think?" This was the second time that Prime Minister Qin had mentioned this to the King of Shu. After a moment of shock, the king's face lit up and he said, "In the past 2 months, I have been thinking about it and felt a lot of emotions. That's exactly what I wanted to do." "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin." Prime Minister Qin nodded and a hint of relief appeared on his face. The King of Shu suddenly changed the topic and asked, "I've heard about what happened yesterday. Brother Qin Yu, he didn't sleep last night and just fell asleep." Speaking of this matter, Prime Minister Qin's face showed disappointment and disappointment again. The King of Shu cupped his hands and said, "In that case, I won't bother you anymore. I'll visit you in 2 days. Your Highness, if you have nothing to do these days, you might as well pay a visit to the families of generals and other officials' mansions. After all, there are some things that even I don't have the right to do." "I understand. Well, Prime Minister Qin, you don't have to see me out." At the gate of Qin's mansion, the King of Shu bowed to Prime Minister Qin again and turned to get on the carriage. "Fortune or misfortune, Your Highness has really grown up this time," Prime Minister Qin said softly and turned to step into the mansion. Inside the carriage, the King of Shu had a faint smile on his face. After a while, the smile on his face disappeared and a strange light flickered in his eyes. He asked, "Have you found out the details of those 2 women?" "Your Highness, I have." A voice came from outside the carriage. The King of Shu smiled again and unconsciously rubbed his fingers. He picked up a book beside him and read it attentively. Chapter 545. Every time he planned to go to the palace, he would have a bad feeling in his heart. Therefore, Li Yi stayed at home for the past few days. As he sat on the stone bench in the courtyard thinking about life, his eyes were suddenly covered by someone from behind. "Guess who I am?" A strange voice came from behind him. Xiao Huan was not that naughty, Rui would not do such a childish thing, and Mississippi Lu was even more so. Although she purposely pinched her throat, it was not hard to tell that the little devil who had been tormenting him for 2 months was here again. "Let me guess, is it Xiao Huan?" "No," the voice behind him said proudly. "Then is it Duanwu?" Li Yi said again. "Guess again." The arrogant loli was obviously very proud of herself, this time she did not even try to hide her voice. "Li Bingning, what did you touch with your hand?" Li Yi moved her hand away and asked while rubbing his eyes. "I didn't touch anything." The arrogant loli said in surprise, "It's just that my mother caught a cold last night, so I just made a bowl of ginger soup for her." "How did you know it was me?" The arrogant loli was really his nemesis, Li Yi thought as he washed his eyes with water. Using ginger to make people cry was a common method used by the newcomers in the brothel who had no acting skills. Li Yi guessed that the ginger that the arrogant loli used to make the ginger soup today must be very old. While Li Yi was washing his eyes, the arrogant loli was playing with the rabbit that she had caught with her own hands with a vegetable leaf. At this time of year, it was really a luxury to feed the rabbit with vegetables. Fortunately, the greenhouse was built earlier this year, so he would not have to eat dried vegetables for the whole winter. "I talked to my father a few days ago," the arrogant loli suddenly said while holding the rabbit. "What did he say?" Li Yi also asked casually. Li Yi guessed that it was to allow her to leave the palace as she pleased. The old emperor did not put on any airs and did not act like an emperor at all. He was even more indulgent towards the arrogant Lolita. Li Yi was afraid that he would suffer in the future. The proud Lolita said proudly, "I'll tell my father and ask him to betroth me to you in a few years." Clang! Because his hand moved too much, the copper basin fell to the ground. Li Yi's clothes and shoes were all wet. "What did you say?" he asked again, afraid that he had misheard. "I'll ask my father to betroth me to you," the proud Lolita said confidently. Li Yi stood in the courtyard and couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. He finally knew where that ominous premonition of the past few days came from. He looked at the palace guards and the gray-robed elder standing outside the courtyard. He wondered if he could make it in time if he ran now. The precocious young lady was very dangerous. Li Yi suddenly lost his sense of security. If she said something even more outrageous in front of the old emperor, he was afraid that he would really have to run. He sighed, picked up the copper basin, and walked into the house. He waved at the proud Lolita and said, "Shining, come over here. Teacher wants to talk to you about something." The proud Lolita left. Before she left, she said that she would come back to see her rabbit in a few days. She also reminded Li Yi that he still owed her a roasted meat. He would make it up to her next time. She was almost gone. Why would he eat roasted meat? Li Yi felt that one day he would be tricked by the proud Lolita to death, unknowingly. At this moment, Fong walked in from outside. He looked at him and asked doubtfully, "Young master, I just heard that someone is going to be betrothed to you. You can't be thinking of asking the emperor to help you, right? If you force it, I'm afraid that eldest miss won't agree." Fong. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Has anyone recently said that you talk a lot?" "No." Fong shook his head and looked at him. "Little Red said that what I said recently was very reasonable. What do you think, young master?" Li Yi looked at him and said seriously, "From now on, you are not allowed to speak in front of me." Fong nodded and began to gesture something with his hands. What a mess. After a while, Li Yi waved his hand and asked, "What do you want to say?" Old Fong pointed at his mouth with an innocent look on his face. Li Yi took a deep breath and said, "You can say something." Fong nodded and said, "Something has happened at Miss Sang and Miss Wan's place these days." "What is it?" Li Yi looked at him and asked. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 seconds. "What is it?" Li Yi asked again. Fong pointed to his mouth again. Li Yi felt that his temper had become much better recently. He sighed and said, "The few greenhouses in the farm are a bit busy these days. Why don't you come back to help? It's closer to home." Recently, there have been a lot of idlers around Miss Sing and Miss Wan's place. Recently, a lot of idlers have been appearing around the place where Miss Sing and Miss Wan live. They seem to be up to no good. I had some men catch a few of them, but they didn't get anything out of them. Later, some experts came. Fortunately, some of the men we sent out were quite strong. 2 of our men were injured. Yesterday, I stayed there for the whole afternoon, but I didn't meet anyone else. Young master, should we send some more men to guard the place?" Lao Fong finished his words fluently in one breath. Sure enough, there were still people who didn't know what was good for them. Li Yi's face darkened slightly. He asked, "How many of our people are on the heaven list now?" Fong thought for a while and said, "A dozen. Please send 2 people over. Send 10 more masters on the earth list." Since Mississippi Lu established the Lu Alliance, the number of women on the heaven list suddenly increased. Those who received guidance from her were extremely respectful to her and Rui. Sometimes, Li Yi was also amazed that there were so many women in the world who were crazy about martial arts. Naturally, they didn't just practice martial arts. Sometimes, they would also have some tasks, most of which were related to the brothel. There should be no problem if the masters on the heaven list were to watch them for a while. As for Wan Ruoqing's travel, there was no need to worry at all. As the head of the brothel, she had extraordinary security around her. If they were just ruffians, it would be fine. If someone really went crazy and invited powerful people, it would be guaranteed that nothing would go wrong. It didn't matter who it was for the time being. Anyway, there were only a few people. According to the current situation, they would get revenge sooner or later. As for now, it was all on the King of Shu. By the way, young master, there's one more thing. As if thinking of something, Fong took out a piece of paper from his sleeve and said, "I almost forgot. Someone just sent this, saying that it's from Qin's mansion." Qin's mansion. Li Yi took the paper from him and opened it. After reading it, a look of surprise appeared on his face. He read it again, and the expression on his face was somewhat indescribable. Prime Minister Qin. Why would Prime Minister Qin invite him over? Were they familiar? Was it a trap? Speaking of which, he was indeed not a stranger. Not only did he have a grudge against Qin Yu, but he had also ruined many things for Prime Minister Qin and the King of Shu. It couldn't be said that their hatred was as deep as the sea, but there was still a lot of hatred between them. As a result, the content of this piece of paper was somewhat thought-provoking. It's just two women, and you still haven't settled them. What do I want you for? The King of Shu looked at the people below and asked lightly. A young man said in fear and trepidation, Your Highness, it's really because there's an expert beside that woman. We can't get close to her. Two of those idlers had their legs broken, and the experts in the king's mansion also encountered a strong enemy. Their chances of winning were not high, so they had no choice but to retreat. I'll give you another half a month. If you still can't do what I told you, then don't come back. Leave. The King of Shu glanced at them, waved his hand, and said impatiently. The few people hurriedly retreated as if they had been granted amnesty. The King of Shu looked at a name on the paper in his hand and clenched his fist. The paper was immediately crumpled into a bowl. The humiliation that day, I will definitely return it 100 times over. A suppressed and gloomy voice came from the hall, and then there was no more sound. Chapter 546. Sitting in the carriage, Fang said worriedly, Young master, that Qin guy is not a good person. Do we really have to go? What if he brings people to ambush us inside? Won't we be too few? Sitting in the carriage, Li Yi didn't know why Prime Minister Qin invited him to Qin's mansion. Whether it was a trap or some other purpose, he had to go and have a look after receiving the invitation from the Prime Minister. And Prime Minister Qin invited him so openly, so he didn't have to worry about his safety. If something really happened, he would be the one with a bigger headache. In case of any accidents, he originally wanted to let Mississippi Lu accompany him, but she was really busy recently, and Rui's identity was not very suitable. After thinking about it, he brought Fang. The carriage stopped in front of Qin's mansion. Li Yi got off, waved his hand and said, Okay, find a place outside and wait. Nothing will happen. A servant of Qin's mansion had already come over and asked respectfully, Are you Mr. Li? Li Yi handed over the invitation in his hand. After the servant saw it, he immediately said, Mr. Li, please. Master is waiting for you inside. The attitude of the servant of Qin's mansion made Li Yi feel a little surprised. It seemed that today was not like what he had imagined. It did not seem to be a punitive expedition against him. After all, he had a deep grudge with the heir to the Qin family. A few days ago, he accidentally cheated him a little. It was reasonable for the Qin family to make trouble for him because of these things. Fang and several guards sat under a big tree opposite, glancing at Qin's mansion from time to time. Led by the servant, Li Yi walked through Qin's mansion and looked around. Qin's mansion was not like what he had imagined. Although it was still beyond the reach of ordinary people in terms of scale and other aspects, it was still a little simple for the Prime Minister who was above tens of thousands of people. There were not many maidservants on the way. They were just quietly working, looking a little lifeless. They were not like the maidservants in his family. Although they did a lot of work, they chattered all day and did not look like maidservants. They were the only ones in the capital. Brother Lu's words are too biased. Who said that women enjoy leisure? Men go to war at the border while women weave at home. They farm during the day and spin cotton at night. They work hard day and night, a voice came from the front. He didn't expect that there would be people in the Qin manor who liked to listen to dramas. It was actually Hua Mulan. Li Yi saw a middle-aged man who looked familiar walking over from the front. He was humming a part of the song and it was all in tune. It was not until he saw the man coming from behind that he saw him that. The man saw Li Yi and was stunned. Then, his expression quickly returned to normal. He followed behind the middle-aged man and passed by Li Yi. The middle-aged man took a few steps and suddenly turned around. He pointed at Li Yi and asked the servant, "Who is this? Why have I never seen him before?" The servant hurriedly replied, "Fifth Master, this is Li Yi, County Uncle Li. He is Master's guest. Master is still waiting, so we'll go over first." The fifth master of the Qin clan was stunned. The old master that the servant mentioned was naturally his father. However, there were many guests in the house, but almost all of them took the initiative to visit. With his father's status, it was naturally impossible for him to visit others. However, there were very few people that he personally invited. He was confused for a moment and then realized something else. Li Yi, County Uncle Li. He was stunned for a moment and looked at the man uncertainly. He asked, "Did he just say Li Yi, County Uncle Li?" The man nodded and said, "That's right. Let's go back and have a look." With an excited smile on his face, Fifth Master turned around and walked in the direction where he came from. "Fifth Master, aren't you going to watch the play today?" The man asked doubtfully. "Why? There are ready-made plays at home. By the way, is the King of Shu in the young master's room now?" "Oh, not bad. The house is lively today." Seeing Fifth Master striding forward, the man scratched his head with a trace of doubt on his face. Then, he shook his head and quickly followed Fifth Master. The Qin's mansion did not seem to be very big. At least, it was much smaller than Li Xian's mansion. Li Yi estimated that after 3 or 5 minutes, the servant took him to a hall. He walked in and said, "Master, County Uncle Li is here." The servant was also surprised at this time. Usually, when guests came to the mansion, they were the ones waiting for the master. Even the King of Shu was no exception. Today's situation was extremely rare. Li Yi walked in and saw a white-haired old man sitting on the main seat. He was wearing a plain Confucian robe and looked exactly the same as Prime Minister Qin that Li Yi usually saw. "Greetings, Prime Minister Qin." Even though the few times he met Prime Minister Qin could not be called harmonious, the necessary etiquette could not be omitted. The reason why he called himself junior, instead of a subordinate, was that the college was directly under the jurisdiction of the old emperor. Even the Prime Minister had no right to intervene. In fact, he did not have a superior and subordinate relationship with the officials of the court. "Sit." Prime Minister Qin stretched out his hand and said straightforwardly. There was a short table between the two chairs. Li Yi could not sit on the lower seat and shout while talking. After glancing at Prime Minister Qin, he sat on the other chair. "You must be very surprised that I invited you here today, right?" Prime Minister Qin looked at Li Yi and spoke straightforwardly. "It is indeed a little surprising." Li Yi nodded and said, "Serve the tea." Prime Minister Qin gave a rare smile. He did not seem to be in a hurry to get to the main topic. After waving to the door, a servant from the Qin residence walked in. This tea originated in Songzhou and was given by His Majesty. It is the best of the tributes and cannot be tasted normally. Prime Minister Qin was actually in the mood to introduce tea, which made Li Yi even more puzzled. He did not know what medicine the Prime Minister was selling. However, he was not in a hurry. He smiled and said, "In that case, I will be in luck today." The servant girl who poured the tea carefully handed a cup of tea to Prime Minister Qin and the other to Li Yi. Her hands were trembling slightly, causing the lid and the cup to collide with each other, making clanking sounds. Seeing this, Li Yi immediately became vigilant. It was just pouring tea, but she was so scared. Could it be that the tea was poisoned? He looked up at the servant and found that her face was covered with a thin veil. Could it be a masked assassin? As Li Yi thought of this, he held the chair with one hand. Prime Minister Qin frowned and asked in a low voice, "What's the matter?" "Master, I'm not feeling well," the servant said with a trembling voice. Prime Minister Qin's face eased and said, "Since you're not feeling well, go back to your room and rest. Tell the housekeeper to get someone else." At this time, Li Yi's face had calmed down. He stood up and said with a smile, "I'm really sorry, I suddenly have to go to the toilet. I don't know, in the current situation, it was not appropriate to say that directly." Prime Minister Qin had already picked up the teacup, but he put it down and said, "People have to go to the toilet, it doesn't matter." Then he looked at the servant and said, "You take Uncle Li to the toilet first." Li Yi smiled apologetically and walked out slowly. The servant put down the tray and walked out behind him. She clenched her fists. Under the thin veil, her expression was indescribable. Chapter 547. A few steps behind Li Yi, the veiled maid lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Uncle Li, the toilet is in front. Why are you here?" Li Yi turned around and looked at her. The maid's body trembled slightly, and her voice was a little panicked. "Uncle Li, I don't know what you are talking about. I mean, why are you in the capital and in Prime Minister Qin's mansion?" Li Yi stared at her and asked, "Lu Mei, where are your parents?" The maid's body trembled again, but she also knew that she couldn't hide her identity. She slowly took off her veil, and it could be seen that she was pretty, but the scar on her face was extremely eye-catching. And her appearance was not strange to Li Yi. "Dead, all dead." She looked complicated and said in a sad voice, "On the way to the capital, I encountered bandits, and my parents died. I was saved by a passing caravan. Later, I had no choice but to stay here because the steward of Qin's mansion pitied me." Li Yi looked at the woman in front of him. She was young, but her face was full of vicissitudes. He couldn't connect her with the arrogant girl in Willow Leaf Village a year ago. If he remembered correctly, this girl named Lu Mei should be the daughter of Rui's third uncle. When she was in Willow Leaf Village, she didn't get along with Xiao Huan and the others, but it was mostly expressed in words of dissatisfaction and cynicism. Naturally, there was no deep hatred between them. Later, because of the matter of the Lulan gang, Rui's uncles took money from their families, left Willow Leaf Village, and settled down in their own homes in order to avoid trouble. It was strange that after that day, Li Yi never saw them again until he saw Lu Mei here. In that case, third uncle and third aunt were no longer in this world. When Li Yi recalled, he could only remember that third uncle was a skinny man who didn't talk much and seemed to be afraid of his wife. Third aunt was quite powerful. She could stand at the door and argue with second aunt for an hour without losing. But now, too many things had happened in this 1 year. To him, these were all very distant memories. The enmity with the Lu clan had been reduced to dust a long time ago. Li Yi looked at her, thought for a moment, and asked, "What are your plans for the future?" "Plan?" A smile appeared on Lu Mei's face, but it was uglier than crying. I'm already like this, what other plans can I have? I'm pretty good right now." Li Yi looked at her again, shook his head, and walked back the way he came. Lu Mei turned around. Even after his figure disappeared, she stood there for a long time, her face ashen. She could still remember that one day about a year ago, when her mother came back from outside, she didn't seem very happy. Later, she learned that Sister Rui snatched a husband from outside, which ruined some of their plans. She remembered that her mother had been thinking about their 2 acres of land for a long time. In the beginning, she had seen the husband of the stronghold a few times. Her impression of him was that he was thin and weak, but he was very handsome. At that time, she sometimes thought that she wanted to marry someone like him, who looked comfortable and different from the other people in the village, but he had to be rich. Later, she gradually realized that the scholar was amazing. He could write poems, teach, and earn money. Everyone said that Sister Rui found a treasure. At that time, she was actually a little envious. Later, when he sold candied haws, the family also sold candied haws. Later, he became the county magistrate, and the situation in Willow Leaf Village changed. Later, she left the village with her parents and went to a neighboring county. After settling down, she didn't deliberately ask for news there. Later, she made some money selling candied haws and wanted to come to Jingdo to live with her relatives and continue the candied haws business. Who would have thought that something like that would happen on the road? Later, that relative also, during those days, she suffered a lot before she came to the Chin family. Finally, she had a place where she could shelter herself from the wind and rain. Although she was often ordered around, she didn't ask for anything now. She had once thought about marrying a handsome young man, but this thought hadn't appeared in a long time. Then, she heard some news. The Count of Chang'an, the emperor's favorite, one of the 3 heroes of Jingdo, had defeated the people of the Qi kingdom. Even her little duke had suffered a lot at his hands. Every time she thought of this, her heart would become somewhat complicated. If they hadn't left that day, would things have been different? However, there were no ifs in this world. She touched the scar on her face, put on her veil again, and silently left with her head down. Meeting Lu Mei in Qin Manor was beyond Li Yi's expectations. She could be considered an old friend. If Rui, or Xiao Huan learned of this news, he didn't know what they would do. The old grievances of the past were not worth mentioning now. However, this was Qin Manor. If he acted too special toward her, it would not be a good thing for her. Right now, this was all he could do. When he walked back, he coincidentally ran into a servant of Qin Manor and asked him for directions. Only then did he realize that he had gone the wrong way. He walked back another 30 to 50 feet and disappeared behind a moon door. Miss May. The man who had led the way scratched his head and nodded slightly. Wu Er, why aren't you done yet? A voice came from nearby. Wu Er hurriedly replied, I'm coming. He glanced in a certain direction, turned around, and ran over with quick steps. I've made Prime Minister Qin wait a long time. Li Yi walked into the hall and raised his hands in a salute. No problem. Prime Minister Qin waved his hand and didn't seem to mind at all. He said, the tea might be getting cold. I'll have someone make another cup. Li Yi waved his hand and said, no need to trouble yourself. I don't usually drink tea. He rarely drank tea. As for the tea of Qin Manor, he couldn't drink it. Who knew if there was something else added to it? He wasn't measuring the heart of a gentleman with his own mean measure. Perhaps Prime Minister Qin couldn't do such a thing, but some people could. What's the matter, Prime Minister Qin? After Li Yi sat down again, he asked directly. Prime Minister Qin took a sip of tea unhurriedly and asked casually, Mr. Li is a rare young talent in our Jing kingdom. What do you think of the recent political affairs? Li Yi was stunned for a moment. Then he shook his head and said, I haven't seen it. I've never been to the court. Prime Minister Qin's hand, which was putting down the teacup, froze slightly. In fact, he wanted to recruit Li Yi today. From his observation in the past few months, Li Yi could really be called the first person among the young generation in the Jing kingdom. He was favored by the emperor and was highly valued by the emperor. Besides, he had a close relationship with the prince of Prince Ning, Li Xian. Prince Ning's influence in the court couldn't be underestimated. What's more, Prince Li Xian had the support of the Wang family and other big families. If he could make Prince Li Xian be loyal to the Prince of Shu, he wouldn't have to worry about it. Of course, this kind of thing couldn't be said clearly. He did want to say a few words in a roundabout way, but Mr. Li's first sentence ended the conversation. He was not prepared for it and his thoughts were disrupted. At this moment, he didn't know how to continue asking. Chapter 548. In a room of an exquisite small building in Qin's mansion, Qin Yu was lying on a bed covered with several layers of brocade quilts. A certain part of his body was wrapped with white cloth, and his face was extremely pale. He had just recovered from a serious illness, and he was beaten 80 times. Although he did not lose his life, this time he might need to recuperate for a few days. I didn't expect. He shook his head and said in a weak voice, I didn't expect His Majesty to indulge him to such an extent that he could even take 2 little princesses out of the palace. It's not an injustice to lose this time. King Shu on the side had a deep understanding of this. Last time, he lay in the palace for 2 months, while the other side was as free and unrestrained as ever outside the palace. Sometimes he even wondered who was the biological son of his father, himself or Li Yi. He had been like this since he was a child. Not to mention Emingzu, he even treated that damn Li Xian much better than he did. He felt that he had a fake father. These days, for the first time, he realized that the high position did not seem to be so easy to get. This kind of thought had never appeared before. King Shu shook his head and said, These days, you'd better rest at home. This time, there are many of you. If you were alone, it would not be as simple as dozens of floggings. That matter, is that it? Qin Yu suddenly said without rhyme or reason. King Shu knew what he was referring to. He shook his head helplessly again and said, What else can I do? Intermittent hysteria, madness, I can only admit that I'm unlucky. Yes. Qin Yu sighed and said, I can only admit that I'm unlucky. They had been together since childhood, so they naturally knew each other's temperament. They looked at each other and had a tacit understanding. The position of Crown Prince. Li Yi said in surprise, Of course, this matter has to be decided by His Majesty. It's better for us, foreign officials, to stay out of it. It wasn't easy to bring the topic to the main point. Qin Xiang thought that his meaning had been expressed very clearly. However, Li Xianbue had been avoiding the topic and never responded to it directly. He didn't know how many times he had the impulse to serve tea and send off his guest. After saying so much, Qin Xiang's throat was a little dry. He picked up the teacup and took a sip. Li Yi stood up from his seat, cupped his hands and said, If that's the case, this junior will take his leave. Why? Is there something urgent in Uncle Li's family? Prime Minister Qin was stunned. He didn't know why Li Mu would do this. Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, Hasn't Prime Minister Qin already served tea to see the guests off? The current him was no longer the newbie who had just arrived here. The ancient people liked to beat around the bush when they spoke and did things. Serving tea meant sending the guest off. He was not as blind as Li Xian. This old man is just thirsty. Prime Minister Qin didn't realize that his actions would cause a misunderstanding. He said, I won't beat around the bush. I know that you have a grudge against the King of Shu. I only have one question. If your Highness is willing to let go of the grudge, can County Uncle Li let bygones be bygones? The King of Shu will inherit the throne in the future. You should be clear about the pros and cons. He would never be so straightforward when he talked to people. However, if he continued to talk in the way just now, he was afraid that there would be no result even when it was dark. However, he didn't have the patience to wait any longer. In fact, just now Li Yi had roughly guessed why Prime Minister Qin called him here today. However, was he sure that the King of Shu was willing to let go of the grudge? If that guy had such a mind, things wouldn't have gotten to this point. If he really became the emperor, would there be a way for him and others to live? Since he took action in the palace that day, there had been no way out. Naturally, it was impossible for him to turn back. Either he lived or the King of Shu died. There was no second possibility. Li Yi sighed and pointed to his head. He said, Prime Minister Qin, you know that sometimes I can't control myself, especially when I see the King of Shu. I don't know when my hysteria will act up. If I hurt the King of Shu again, I'm afraid that His Majesty will see my head. The court officials won't agree either. It's not good for anyone. In fact, until now, Prime Minister Qin still didn't know whether the intermittent hysteria was real or not. After all, if there was no illness, a normal person wouldn't do something like beating a prince in the palace under the watchful eyes of the public. However, in this world, was there really such a magical illness? Or was the king of Shu and him born to oppose each other? The judgment of the Imperial Physician Bureau could not be false. After all, Li Yi had just arrived in the capital. It was impossible for him to control the Imperial Physician Bureau so quickly and make an imperial physician say something that deceived the emperor. If this was true, then he was too powerful. Prime Minister Qin frowned and asked, "This hysteria, how did you get it?" Li Yi sighed faintly. He said, "It's a long story. Everything starts from that winter 10 years ago. The king of Shu walked out of Qin Yu's courtyard, looked back, and then turned to leave. The reason why Qin Yu fell into this situation was caused by Li Yi. Even his current predicament couldn't escape from him. However, now that he was getting stronger, he was valued by the emperor father, the eldest princess, Li Xian, and the family of generals. As long as he didn't ascend the throne, he couldn't do anything to him. Although he didn't want to admit it, it was a fact. He could influence some things in the court, but for him, who wasn't in the court at all, it was not worth mentioning. As for small fights in private, it wouldn't hurt the foundation, and there was a high possibility that it would be exposed. Naturally, he wouldn't do it easily. Coincidentally, he found out that the girl had a close relationship with him. If something happened to her, Li Yi would naturally not be happy, but he would be happy. However, he was depressed to find out that he could not even complete such a small task, which made him feel even more depressed. As he was thinking about these things, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest when he turned a corner in a long corridor. He looked down and saw the maid who accidentally bumped into him. He slapped her and said coldly, "Lowly maid, don't you have eyes?" If this was in the king of Shu's mansion, such a servant would have been dragged out and beaten. However, this was the Qin's mansion, so he naturally had to restrain himself. The maid was wearing a thin veil on her face. After the slap, the veil fell off, revealing a scar on her face. Seeing this, the king of Shu felt even more disgusted. Sorry. The maid covered her face and kept apologizing. In a pavilion not far away, the Qin family's fifth master shook his head in disappointment. What a coincidence, what a coincidence. There's no fun to watch now. Just as he finished speaking, he saw a young figure walk out of the hall. After a moment of shock, a look of excitement appeared on his face. He grabbed a handful of melon seeds peeled by a maid and put them in his mouth, staring in a certain direction. Get lost. The king of Shu scolded the maid coldly and walked past her. Suddenly, he felt something and turned his head to look, meeting with another pair of eyes. This was a big surprise. Looking at that gaze, the king of Shu immediately thought of some unhappy things. He couldn't help but take a few steps back, but he didn't notice the steps behind him. He stepped on air, and the sharp pain from his ankle made his expression a little hideous. At the same time, he lost his balance and fell into the lotus pond at the side. Save me, save me. In just a few breaths of time, the Qin manor was filled with the sounds of chickens flying and dogs jumping. Countless panicked figures began to madly rush towards the pool. Li Yi and Lu Mei looked at each other with innocent expressions on their faces. This time, they really couldn't blame him. He was also very surprised to meet the king of Shu here. He just glanced at him, and then the king of Shu jumped into the pond. Could this be the legendary King Zora? Not far away, the Qin family's fifth master widened his eyes, and melon seeds sprayed out from his nose. He didn't expect the king of Shu to be so afraid of County Uncle Li that he jumped into the pond in fear from a distance of several feet. It was said that the king of Shu was a good-for-nothing. Today, he saw that the rumors were true. Chapter 549. The water in the lotus pond was not deep, and the king of Shu was quickly fished out by the servants of Qin's mansion. When he fell down, he was not injured, but his whole body was wet. But before he fell, he sprained his ankle. It seemed to be quite serious, and he could not even stand up. He was immediately carried away by 2 servants, and another person hurried out of the mansion to find a doctor. After the king of Shu disappeared, the expressions of some servants in Qin's mansion became a little strange. Many people had seen the scene just now. A dignified prince was actually scared to this extent by a county uncle. It was really a bit too embarrassing. Qin Xiang walked out of the hall. When he looked back from the lotus pond, the way he looked at Li Yi was completely different from before. In the end, he did not succeed in roping him in. No matter what reason the other party found, he was still standing on the opposite side of the king of Shu. Moreover, the scene he saw just now proved that there was probably no way to turn back the situation. Li Yi turned back, cupped his hands to Qin Xiang, and said, "I will leave first, the soup is still boiling at home." Qin Xiang nodded slightly and said to the servant girl beside him, "Show the way for County Uncle Li." "No need, remember the way." Li Yi waved his hand, turned around, and left. Looking at his back, Qin Xiang could not hide the pity on his face. The servant girl with a scar on her face also looked up, bit her lips, and slowly left. Su San left Hongdong County, and came to the street. "I have not spoken, but my heart is miserable. Gentlemen, listen to me. Who will go to Nanjing and pass the letter to my San Lang?" "Fifth Lord, where are you going?" Seeing the fifth lord humming a tune with his hands behind his back, Wu Er asked in confusion. The fifth lord sighed and said, "It's not enough, not enough, let's go out to watch the opera. I heard from Rui that you went to Prime Minister Qin's mansion today." While eating, Rui looked up at Li Yi and asked, "Oh, yes." Li Yi picked up a mouthful of food and said casually, "We just chatted casually, and didn't even drink tea. The Qin family is so stingy, what business does Prime Minister Qin have with you?" Although Li Yi rarely mentioned anything about the imperial court or outside matters, she was actually very clear about her family's position in the imperial court, friends and foes, as well as some changes in the situation. Because some of the departments in the brothel were in charge of such things. "It's nothing much. We just casually chatted for a bit. He said that I'm going to assist the king of Shu, but he's just a pile of mud that can't be supported." "What's there to support?" Li Yi put down his chopsticks and peeled a prawn for Xiao Huan. Rui had no problem peeling prawns as they could do it with just 2 chopsticks. Only Xiao Huan could not learn it no matter how hard she tried and always made a mess. Xiao Huan and he both liked to eat prawns, but the prawns had been kept in the ice house for a long time and were not very fresh. Today's prawns were sent by the Tsundra Lolita from the palace. He heard that they were the newly arrived tribute prawns. This was the advantage of being an emperor. He could eat whatever he wanted. If there was nothing in Jingdo, he could have other places pay tribute to him. Ever since the cost of making ice had been greatly reduced, fruits shipped from distant places had become cheap. "Thank you, Prime Minister," Xiao Huan said sweetly and focused on eating. Prime Minister Qin and the King of Shu were all bad people. Prime Minister Qin would beat up bad people. She only wanted to eat prawns. Then, did anything happen? Rui asked again. "No." Li Yi shook his head and said, "They are all scholars. What can happen? Even if they really want to do something, they can't be so brazen. Besides, Fong and the others are following them, so there's no need to worry." After saying that, he looked at Rui and asked, "How's the hero competition going? It should be coming soon, right?" Rui shook her head and said, "I'm afraid it will be delayed for a few more days. Recently, there have been more and more experts coming to Jingdo. The heaven list changes every day. Even if it is held now, I'm afraid many people will not agree. Originally, they did not consider the problem of the number of people. If any Tom, Dick, or Harry came to fight for the position of the chief of Wulin, how long would the competition last? However, if the qualification was limited to the experts on the heaven list, the hero list would be in an uproar. Those who wanted to keep a low profile would probably not be able to do it. Whether they could be the chief or not, they still had to fight for the qualification. This directly led to a great increase in the number of competitions that needed to be held every day. Of course, there were many experts, and it was much more exciting than before. The daily profits also doubled. If they were allowed to compete for another 2 months, not only would they be able to recoup their losses, but they would also make a lot of money. 2 months could not be delayed. According to the current situation, all the preparation work should be finished in half a month at most. The only thing left was to send Mississippi Lou to the top. After talking with Rui and the others about the heroes' meeting, Li Yi suddenly thought of something and said, "I saw Lu Mei at the Qin Manor today." Xiao Huan suddenly raised her head and asked, "Son-in-law, which Lu Mei is it? The one who always quarreled with you in Willow Leaf Village?" The maid was stunned for a moment, then she pouted and said, "It's her. Ever since she was young, she had always been bullied by Lu Mei." After what had happened, it was only natural that she did not have a good impression of her. "Why is she in Qin Manor? Where are third uncle and third aunt?" Rui asked curiously. Mississippi Lou also looked over. "Third uncle and third aunt." Li Yi paused. He thought about it and told them the truth. Xiao Huan was stunned, and the chopsticks in her hand fell to the ground. The expressions on Rui and Rui's faces froze. After a long time, Rui sighed and said, "Third uncle is actually very honest. When they went overboard, he stood up for us. Third aunt. She has always been very powerful, but," Rui shook her head. "Even though there was some hatred in the past, death was like a lamp going out. In the end, there was still some relationship. She thought of some things when she was young and felt a little depressed." Mississippi Lou put down her chopsticks and walked out of the door. "If it was somewhere else, I could help. But it's Qin Manor. If I show something different, it will hurt her." Xiao Huan was not in a good mood, and so was Rui. Li Yi said, "But it's not impossible to ask her to leave Qin Manor. But I think she might not agree." It was not suitable for him to ask for a maidservant from Qin Manor. Of course, the other party would not give it to him. But whether it was the Princess Royal, Atsundra Lolita, or directly asking the old emperor for a decree, although the process was a little troublesome, it was doable. After a short contact, Li Yi could feel some of her thoughts. She actually had some self-esteem, or else she would have asked for it herself. He thought that he knew he could not face Rui and the others, so he could not force himself to do something. After a while, Li Yi walked out of the room. He decided to put the matter of Lu Mei aside for the time being. Not long after, Rui also walked out of the room. She was a little annoyed. 2 maidservants were cleaning the courtyard while talking about something with great interest. "I went out to help buy things today and heard something interesting on the street." "What?" "What?" "I heard that yesterday at Prime Minister Qin's manor, the king of Shu was so scared that he sprained his ankle and fell into the water." "Ha ha ha, it's so funny. I heard that the person just looked at him and the king of Shu was scared. I didn't expect him to be so timid, even more timid than Xiao Qing. The whole capital is laughing. Oh, I can't take it anymore. I'm dying of laughter. Who else can scare the king? Did he bump into a ghost? I just heard a few words and then followed him. I don't know what happened next." Qin Manor, the king of Shu. Standing in the corridor, Rui was stunned. She looked in a certain direction and saw that Li Yi had just disappeared. "Didn't you say that nothing happened?" In the king of Shu's manor, the king of Shu was furious when he heard the servant's report. He flipped the table on the spot. "Who is it? Who is it? Tell Qin Yu and I will find out. I will kill him." In a courtyard of the Qin manor, a light and cheerful tune could be heard. Brother Lu's words are too biased. Chapter 550. Li Yi found that the maidservants in the residence were a little strange these days. They often stole glances at him when he wasn't paying attention. When he noticed that they were also looking at him, they would all look away. This was something that had never happened before. When he washed his face in the morning, he looked at his reflection in the water a few more times. Recently, he hadn't obviously become more handsome. There was no reason for him to suddenly become so charming. "What are you looking at?" When he sat in the courtyard and flipped through the old book that second granduncle gave him, he saw two maidservants hiding in the corner looking at him. They were whispering and pointing at him. He finally couldn't help but walk over and ask. "No, nothing." The two maidservants lowered their heads and wiped the pillars, not daring to look at him. Li Yi was a little puzzled and ignored them. Yesterday, second granduncle told him that he had neglected his martial arts practice. He threw him a booklet without a cover and the pages had already turned yellow, and told him to read it when he had nothing to do. Fong wasn't so lucky. He was whipped by the two guards. If he persisted for half an hour without being whipped, he would have to start all over again. Lord Ju doesn't look that scary. Yes, are the rumors false? Are they not talking about our Lord Ju? I've asked them twice. They are talking about Lord Ju, but it really doesn't look like it. The two maidservants were full of doubts. Their Lord Ju didn't look like the kind of person who would scare people into jumping into the lake with just a glance, not to mention that he was a prince. If it was the second miss, it was possible. But if it was the handsome and amiable Lord Ju, they really couldn't imagine the scene at that time. But in the past 2 days, the news had spread throughout the capital. Lord Ju had taken a look at the King of Shu in Prime Minister Qin's residence, and the King of Shu had jumped into the lake. It was said that he had even sprained his ankle. To the maids of the Li residence, this was truly unimaginable. Lord Ju had always been kind to them. They had heard that the King of Shu had been beaten up by him before, and it seemed that he had beaten him up quite badly. Naturally, this was something that they could not imagine. But to just take a look at him, how could that be? Li Yi glanced at the two maidservants in the corner and said, "You've already been cleaning that pillar for an hour. If you continue to slack off, I'll deduct your pay." The two maids immediately ran away. Lord Ju's deduction of money was just a passing remark, but they didn't dare to discuss it anymore. The erotic book in his hand gave him a headache. Based on his level, he might not be able to handle it. When he saw Rui walking in from outside, Li Yi hurriedly waved at her. "Wife, come here for a moment." In the next few days, Li Yi spent part of his time studying the erotic book. Rui seemed to value it very much. Whenever she had the time, she would give him pointers. Most of the time, he would take Xiao Huan out for a stroll, to the brothel to watch shows, and to patrol the shops. There was nothing much to do in the palace, and the days were as leisurely as ever. Sometimes, he would also meet Wan Ruoqing. She was always very busy. In the beginning, Li Yi also felt that this was not the way to go on. There were too few people with the ability to manage. When there were more and more shops, there would be more and more things to do. It was far from enough to rely on just one or a few people. Wan Ruoqing nodded and said, "I'm already consciously cultivating them. But this is not a matter of a day or two. I can still take care of things here for the time being." She was always so restless. Li Yi said a few times, but it was obviously not effective. Fortunately, Xiao Zhu was by her side, so she would not be as tired as before. Li Yi changed the topic. He pointed to a shed at the entrance of the brothel and asked, "What is this used for?" When he came here just now, he noticed that there was this thing. There were a few beggars waiting outside, and there was actually a queue. This is the porridge shed that was set up here 2 days ago. These beggars have nothing to do on weekdays, so they let them clean the inside after closing the brothel at night. Usually, it takes a lot of effort to clean, but there are quite a lot of them, so they can save a lot of time. Wan Ruoqing explained, it doesn't cost much to give porridge twice a day, and they are also willing to do it. It's almost mealtime. Those who have worked here can get a bowl of porridge and 2 steamed buns with their tickets. The brothel was a crowded place, and a lot of garbage was produced every day. It was really troublesome to clean, especially after all kinds of melon seeds became popular in the capital these days. The cleaning work became more and more troublesome. This was a good idea. Li Yi felt that this method was unlikely to be Wan Ruoqing's idea. Make the best use of people, and not waste any. This was old Sun's style of doing things. If it was free porridge, he was afraid that it would become a habit. This was also good. In fact, the cost would actually be reduced. Not long after, someone carried a big pot of porridge out from inside. Li Yi took a look, and it was not too thin. The beggars in the queue all had tickets in their hands. One ticket was a bowl of porridge, a salted vegetable, and 2 steamed buns. For these beggars who didn't know the next meal, the food was already very good. Not far away, there were beggars looking at them enviously. Seeing that there was still a lot left after the beggars received their food, the girl in charge of giving out porridge waved her hand and said, "There is still a little left today. If you want to eat, come over. This time it's free for you. If you want to eat every day, go to the other brothels in the capital and ask again. See the one with the willow leaf sign at the door. Ask them if they are still short of people." When the beggars heard this, they immediately swarmed over, loudly saying, "Great benefactor, living bodhisattva," and so on. The girl hurriedly said, "Line up, line up, line up, otherwise we won't give it." In the distant corner of the street, a beggar was about to walk over, but he was stopped by a person. The beggar turned his head and said with some impatience, "I don't care if the Empress of Heaven you speak of is real or not. She can't give me porridge to eat. I'm telling you, don't stop me anymore. In a bit, there will be no porridge left. What is a bowl of porridge?" The young man next to the beggar looked at him with bright eyes and said, 2 months ago, I was the same as you. I didn't believe in the Empress of Heaven, but if it weren't for the Empress, I would have starved to death. How could I have lived until now?" The beggar looked at him again. Although his clothes were not luxurious, they were 100 times better than the beggars here. He suspiciously asked, "The Empress of Heaven, is it real? If you believe in her, you will really have porridge to eat." "Humph, the Empress of Heaven has already appeared twice. Everyone in the capital knows of her. You can go ask." He took out a scroll from his chest and carefully opened it. His face was filled with respect and fanaticism as he said, "This is the Empress of Heaven, wait a moment." The beggar looked at the scroll and hesitantly said, "Wait a moment, I'll go get a bowl of porridge, there really won't be any left. There are many beggars in the capital city. In the past 2 days, many people have come to ask. I've told them to go to other brothels. We really do lack people." As Wan Ruoqing and Li Yi were talking about these things, they saw a beggar walk over from a distance. She picked up the spoon and waited for the beggar to place the bowl on the table in front of her. The young girl who had just given out porridge had a stomachache and went to the bathroom. She happened to see this, so she took her place. The beggar placed the bowl and ticket on the table. He looked up and wanted to give him a bit more, but his mouth opened halfway and his eyes nearly popped out. "Heaven, heaven, heaven. Empress." His voice trembled and his mind went blank. In that instant, a thought appeared in his mind, so those who believe in the Empress of Heaven can really have porridge to drink. What? Empress, did you mistake me for someone else? Wan Ruoqing shook her head with some doubt. Seeing that the young girl had already come over, she handed over the spoon in her hand and turned around to enter the brothel with Li Yi. The young girl rubbed her stomach and gave the beggar some porridge. She routinely said, "Tonight is the same time as before. Wait here and someone will bring you in." Hey, what's wrong? The beggar regained his composure and looked at the young girl. He rubbed his eyes and looked back at her with a puzzled expression. But he quickly reacted. He picked up the bowl of porridge and forgot to even take the steamed bun. He turned around and ran across the street. In a corner of the street, the youth carefully put away the scroll in his sleeve. At this moment, the beggar ran over and grabbed his arm. With a trembling voice, he said, I believe in the Empress of Heaven." As the youth was wondering why the beggar would have such a change, the beggar excitedly said, "I just saw the Empress of Heaven." The youth's body shook and a fanatical look appeared on his face. He grabbed the beggar's arm and asked, Where is the Empress of Heaven?" Chapter 551. Slow down. Everyone has one. The young girl waved her spoon. From time to time, beggars would gather around her. She was alone, so she seemed a bit flustered. No, next time I have to get them to help me. Thinking this, she continued to wave her hand. After you finish eating, remember to go to the other brothels. Next time, you have to use a ticket to get food. On the street, a beggar scratched his head in confusion. He said to himself, "That's not right. I just saw it. Did I see it wrong? It can't be wrong. The young man beside him shook his head. His eyes were full of light. It must be the Empress. Only the Empress would have such a kind heart. Then can I join the holy religion?" The beggar looked at him and nervously asked. "Come with me," the young man said in a low voice. He glanced at the brothel again and committed it to memory. The last time he saw the goddess appear with his own eyes, it was also near here. The two of them turned around, and their figures quickly disappeared into the vast crowd. Not long after, in a remote courtyard in the capital, the purple-clothed man raised an eyebrow. He asked, "The Empress appeared again. Did you see it with your own eyes?" The young man shook his head. "Although I didn't see it with my own eyes, the words of the new believers shouldn't be false. The last time I saw the Empress, it was near here." The purple-clothed man's eyes flashed. After a while, he said, "All right, I understand. Although the Empress is an immortal, she cares for the believers. She will reincarnate into the human world and spread her grace. What you saw was the reincarnation of the Empress after she abandoned her divine power. Remember not to disturb her." "I understand." The young man respectfully cupped his hands and left. His expression was sincere. Whether it was the Empress or the reincarnation of the Empress, they were both existences that gave him a second life. To him, there was no difference. After the young man left, the purple-clothed man walked to a door and gently knocked. "Come in." A light voice came from inside the room. The purple-clothed man pushed open the door and entered. Before he could speak, the middle-aged Taoist nun sitting cross-legged on the bed said, "You did very well. Since the believers of the capital believe in that Empress, then she must be the Empress. But how should we explain it to the believers in other places?" The man in purple asked tentatively. The middle-aged Taoist nun lightly said, "Since the heavenly Empress can have one incarnation, then why can't she have two? One to bring good fortune to all living beings and the other to punish. Why not?" The purple-robed man was stunned for a moment, then immediately said respectfully, "The Empress is wise. The woman in the portrait should be real. Spread the word that the Empress has abandoned her divine power, sealed her memories, and incarnated into the mortal world to experience the suffering of the mortal world. Only then can she benefit more believers. Tell them not to disturb her." After a pause, the middle-aged Taoist nun spoke again, "Also, you should personally investigate who that woman is. This subordinate will do as you bid." The purple-clothed man immediately nodded. Although the events of that day were outside of their plans, after the Empress' reasonable arrangements, they actually had endless benefits. However, they still needed to be careful when dealing with that woman. If there was the slightest mistake, then all of their efforts in the capital would be for nothing. "There is one more thing." The purple-clothed man thought for a moment, then said, "The government seems to have discovered something. Recently, the intensity of the investigation on these matters has increased. This subordinate is worried that if this continues, I'm afraid that there will be some oversight. Then have them stop all actions and return to their normal lives." The middle-aged Taoist nun nodded and asked, "How is the Assembly of Heroes going?" The purple-clothed man said, "This time's Assembly of Heroes has stirred up the entire martial world. The competition on the Heaven Proclamation is fierce and it has been delayed by a month. At the latest, it will be held in half a month. Those secluded sects have also sent their true experts. However, the number one on the Heaven Proclamation is still that woman called Lu Rui." When speaking of those secluded sects, the middle-aged Taoist nun's expression did not change. However, when the purple-clothed man mentioned that name, her brows involuntarily twitched. Lu Rui, the young woman she had met in Qing and Prefecture, was a grandmaster expert like her. She was also the biggest obstacle to her taking the position of alliance leader. It went without saying how useful the position of the leader of the Wulian Alliance was to the Holy Church. Otherwise, she wouldn't have started making arrangements so early. Especially after seeing the power of the imperial palace, she clearly realized that the Holy Church's current power was far from enough. The position of alliance leader could not be lost. Lu Rui. She closed her eyes and softly said this name. In the past 2 days, the headlines of the entertainment section of the Capital Daily were undoubtedly about a young royal family who lost his footing and got drenched by a murderous stare. A prince was as timid as a mouse. Was he the king of Shu or the Rat King? As for County Uncle Li, he was naturally covered with some legendary colors. There was a rumor in the capital that County Uncle Li got sick because of the fear of the king of Shu. Later, in the imperial palace, he seriously injured the king of Shu in front of all the officials, which undoubtedly gave the rumormongers a hard slap in the face. As time went by, this matter was almost forgotten by the people in the capital. However, the incident of the king of Shu jumping into the lake made people dig up the past. In contrast, it was full of irony. Of course, the influence of this incident was far more than that. As the first successor to the throne, the title of King of Shu could be said to be a topic of conversation. His every move was watched by the officials and the people. However, this successor always did some extremely shameful things, which made the people in the capital start to doubt whether their fate would be handed over to such a thing in the near future. Naturally, the officials also had the same concerns. Many people were not very satisfied with the King of Shu. After this incident, they naturally opposed the King of Shu even more. As for those who were still waiting to see which side to take, the balance in their hearts gradually began to tilt. As for those who were originally partial to the King of Shu but were not die-hard fans of the King of Shu, they even began to doubt their lives. Was this a damn fake prince? Could the King of Shu really make it? There were also movements from the other princes. If the King of Shu really couldn't make it, they would have to replace him in advance. No wonder His Majesty didn't express his opinion when Prime Minister Qin and others strongly recommended the King of Shu as the crown prince. When it came to judging people, who could be more brilliant than His Majesty? Of course, these things were not in the hands of Li Yi for the time being. He was in the imperial palace, giving special treatment to Monarch Jin. Sir, I still don't think I can make it. Monarch Jin's chubby face was much thinner than before. He looked at Li Yi with a troubled expression. Why? You don't want to be the dean of the College of Mathematics? Li Yi looked at him and asked. Not anymore. Li Han shook his head and said. Li Yi thought for a moment and looked at him and asked, Do you know where Jinzhou is? Yes, my fief is in Jinzhou. Li Han nodded. Li Yi asked again, Then do you know what Jinzhou is like? Li Han was stunned for a moment, then he shook his head. Jinzhou is very far from the capital. If you take a carriage, you won't be able to get there in 10 days or half a month. There are no sugar-coated haws, no beggar's chicken, no ice in summer, and no fresh vegetables in winter. You won't be able to see your father and mother even once a year. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Now tell me, in a few years, do you want to go to Jinzhou, that remote place where birds don't even shit, to be a prince, or do you want to be the dean of the College of Mathematics and live freely in the capital? Li Han was stunned for a moment, then he suddenly swallowed his saliva. He looked at Li Yi and said with a firm gaze, Sir, give me the book. When he walked out of the museum, Li Yi couldn't help but sigh. These children nowadays were really getting harder and harder to deceive. It was hard to persuade them. It would be better if they were simpler and simpler. Whatever the teacher said, he wouldn't have to waste so much time talking to them. He went to see Yongning and played chess with the Tsundra Lolita for a while. Finally, he used the super-invincible celestial dog that could swallow the whole universe. Only then did he leave with satisfaction. He didn't go to Princess Royal Highness to ask her how she was doing as the chairman of the Women's Federation, how many die-hard female fans she had, how many officials and dignitaries she had won over. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but when he was talking with the old emperor about the College of Mathematics, Li Yi found that the emperor looked at him a little strange, as if he always had an impulse to kick someone in the next second. The imperial palace wasn't a place to stay for long, so it was better to leave as soon as possible. But thinking about it, it was normal. His son had become the laughing stock of the capital, and the title of King of Rats was even more resounding than King of Shu. This time, he was afraid that he would lose a lot of fans in the court. Prime Minister Qin and others had worked hard for so long, but because of this guy's jump, not to mention going back to square one night, it was bound to go back 2 years. Thinking about it, Prime Minister Qin and others should doubt their lives a little more in the past few days. Alas, the old man was so old. If he often worried so much, it would damage his lifespan. He was really worried about the old man. No wonder the old emperor wanted to kick him. If it was him, he would also kick him. Kicking people was a light punishment, and the culprit should be hung up and beaten. The person who spread rumors everywhere was simply a psycho. Was he so terrible that he could kill people with his eyes? If he really had this skill, could King of Shu live to this day? Forget it, it was better to come to the palace less these days. Even if he came, he would not see the old emperor, who was in his 40s. Maybe he had reached his menopause, so he could not afford to provoke him. Today, he helped Prince Jin to strengthen his faith. He believed that in the beggar's chicken, under the attraction of knowledge, he would work harder to study mathematics and strive to be a good successor to the dean of the College of Mathematics. What did he do just now? Emperor Jing asked casually while reading the memorials. Changde walked in from outside the hall and said, Your Majesty, County Uncle Li taught Prince Jin about mathematics for a while in the Bowen Hall, and played with the 2 little princesses for an hour. He just left the palace. Emperor Jing put down the memorial and rubbed his eyebrows. When it came to the 2 little princesses, he had a headache. Changde smiled and said, Your Majesty, don't blame me for being talkative. Princess Shanning's words carry no harm. County Uncle Lee always knows how to behave himself in these things, behave himself. Emperor Jing picked up another memorial and said, he killed County Uncle Lee with his eyes, and made King of Shu jump into the lake with his eyes. He has lost the face of the royal family. What does he know about propriety? Changde smiled and said no more. Although His Majesty said so, in fact, in recent days, he had been doing things in the style of that boy. King of Shu could not represent the face of the royal family, and, seeing that His Majesty no longer said anything, he slowly retreated out of the hall. There were no clouds in the autumn sky, and the wrinkles on his face stretched out. After all, the world still belongs to these young people. Chen, what can I do for you? Xiao Chui opened the courtyard door a crack and poked her head out. She looked at the young man standing outside and asked, "Is your mistress at home?" The young man waved his folding fan and asked with a smile. Xiao Chui frowned when she smelled the strong smell of alcohol. She grew up in a brothel and hated the smell of alcohol the most. Hearing that, she said, "Chen, if you have anything to say, just tell me. I will tell my mistress." "What? A guest is here, and you won't let him in?" The smile on Chen's face disappeared, and several servants behind him also stepped forward. Although Xiao Chui was afraid, she still said boldly, "Men and women should not touch each other. There are only me and my mistress in the courtyard. In order to avoid gossip, Chen should say it here." "You bitch." An angry expression appeared on Chen's face. Just as he said this, the courtyard door opened and Tsing Zumo walked out. She said lightly, "Chen, what do you want? Say it." The young man in front of her, who reeked of alcohol, was Chen, who had been pestering her a lot these days. At first, he pretended to be polite and well-mannered, but after running into a wall a few times, he gradually returned to his playboy nature. She had seen many people like this before. Seeing Tsing Zumo come out, Chen immediately smiled and said, "Zumo, you're out. Let's talk inside, let's talk inside. Let's talk here." Tsing Zumo pulled Xiao Chui back half a step. Her voice seemed to be 1,000 miles away. A trace of anger flashed across Chen's face, but the next moment, he smiled again and said, "Zumo, you know my feelings for you. I promise, as long as you agree to me, you will enjoy endless wealth in the future. If that's the case, then there's no need to talk about it anymore." Tsing Zumo waved her hand. She had heard this kind of talk so much that her ears were about to get calluses. She looked at him and said, "Chen's status is noble. I really don't deserve him. It's better for Chen not to mention this matter in the future." After all, Chen had drunk today. After hearing this, no matter how self-restrained he was, he couldn't help it. She was just a prostitute, yet she made him spend so much effort. He angrily said, "It's your fortune that I like you. Who do you think you are? So what if you're the goddess of Luo Shui? Do you really think you're the daughter of a noble family? Let me tell you, I'm going to have you today." After saying that, he reached out to grab Tsing Zumo's arm. Xiao Chui's expression changed. She pushed Chen away and hurriedly said, "Miss, quickly go inside." Behind Chen, 2 attendants quickly stepped forward and blocked the courtyard door. Tsing Zumo and Xiao Chui's expressions both changed. Tsing Zumo's expression turned cold and said, "Trespassing? We can report this to the authorities." Chen had already stabilized his figure at this time and laughed. "Trespassing is nothing. Today, I'm going to rob a woman." Then, he reached out again and touched Tsing Zumo's face. "You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.